All right. Thank you for joining us at the City of Pinole Planning Commission, our regular meeting, Monday, February 13th at 7 p.m. If you are watching, there are several ways that you can participate. You can check in live on channel 26, which perhaps you are. And if you have to make any comments, you can do that via Zoom by calling the webinar ID is actually 865-0537-5301. You can also make comment by phone, and I'll give you one of those phone numbers at 669-900-6833, and then follow the directions as far as making your comment. You may also make comments by submitting those to Dave Hannum, the planning manager, at dhanam@ci.pinole.ca.us. With that, I'd like to call this meeting to order, and let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. And before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Ohlone people who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place Ohlone land, the land that Pinole sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Ohlone community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Mr. Hannum, could we have roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Menes.
Here.
Commissioner Benzuli.
Here.
Commissioner Current.
Here.
Commissioner Benuelos. Absent. Vice Chair Martinez.
Here.
And Chair Moriarty.
Present.
The records show that we have a quorum tonight, so we can take action on any items on the agenda tonight.
Thank you. Then, citizens to be heard. The public may address the Planning Commission on items that are within its jurisdiction and not listed on the agenda. Do we have any citizens to be heard?
No, we do not, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. Then let's go on to the meeting minutes from January 23rd. Is there any discussion? And do I have a motion to accept those minutes?
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from January 23rd, 2023. I'll second the motion.
Okay, then let's
Vote. Commissioner Menes.
Aye.
Commissioner Benzuli.
Aye.
Commissioner Current.
Aye.
Commissioner Benuelos. Absent. Vice Chair Martinez.
Aye.
Chair Moriarty.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. And so for our public hearing tonight, actually we have no public hearings. So we will go to old business, of which we have none, and new business. I will read a description of that item, and we will listen to the staff report and then ask for any questions to staff and open the public hearing at that point. So tonight, staff is seeking Planning Commission feedback regarding a framework for new outdoor dining regulations on sidewalks. in street parking areas and on public and private property for city council consideration. Mr. Hannum?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could get my PowerPoint, that'd be great. Thanks, Dave. So just kind of give
I'm
us.
sorry, Mr. Hannum, before you go, could we also see our other commissioners on there, the ones who are on Zoom?
Oh, I don't know how.
Mr. Snell? Thank you. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Thanks. So to kind of give you some background, of course, the City of Pinole Outdoor Dining Program was established in 2010 with a major zoning code amendment as part of the quote, the general plan update is and the creation of the 3 corridor specific plan. Pursuant to chapter 17.68, outdoor dining is allowed in all zoning districts with the exception of residential zoning districts with an approval of an administrative use permit and encroachment permit. Administrative design review or comprehensive design review may also require, depending on the proposed structure and where it is located. Section 17.68030 outlines the requirements for permanent outdoor seating and includes standards for maintenance, accessibility, additional offsite parking. The city has issued 5 administrative use permits for outdoor dining under section 17.68020 since 2010. And let me kind of caution that these aren't the temporary ones that we approved back in 2020. These are actual permits that got approved as part of, say, Applebee's has some outdoor dining, or I think there's Outback Steakhouse has some outdoor dining. So there are other areas. There was outdoor dining involved in the Target Shopping Center as well. There's areas where you can sit and eat. So those are what we're talking about in terms of that, in terms of what's been approved as part of administrative use permits. During the COVID pandemic, several businesses requested the ability to accommodate outdoor seating, as you're well aware, with all the indoor requirements and people not being able to eat inside. The outdoor dining was a way to be able to create business for these businesses on a temporary basis. Both the state, the city, ABC also had temporary conditions for these businesses. During the COVID pandemic, several businesses requested the ability to accommodate outdoor seating. The city council adopted urgency ordinance 2020-03 on June 2nd, 2020 for the purpose of streamlining and expediting temporary outdoor dining seat permit to support continued operation of businesses while also complying with health orders. We were doing the temporary use permit process is pretty lengthy just to do a temporary use permit. And so the emergency ordinance allowed us to kind of bypass some of those to expedite some of those to get out. And in section 3 of the urgency ordinance rule, the zoning administrator to waive code requirements of the title of zoning and establish a temporary use permit process for business owners, which I did as part of the process. The process authorized by the urgency ordinance allowed businesses to obtain use permits and to engage in certain activities through an expedited or modified process. City granted 10 temporary use permits through the process authorized by the urgency ordinance for eating establishments to provide outdoor dining. I've listed the 10 that actually did it. 9 of the eating establishments were within existing parking lots of the businesses of where they were at, such as Tina's and Mel's and Antlers, and even Applebee's when they had theirs for a while was actually in their own parking lot. Only Sue's was the quote parklet of the bunch in terms of using the public right of way as part of that. So, and of course, Tina's Place, Applebee's, Antlers, Que Undo, El Steiner, Sue's Place. So those are some of the businesses. Sections 2 and 5 of the urgency ordinance determine the expiration of the temporary use permit as follows. And section 2 states duration of the temporary use permit, and it should basically last, zoning administrator pursuant to this ordinance shall last no longer than 90 days, except that the temporary use permits may be extended by the zoning administrator. If the zoning administrator determines in his or her sole discretion that such waivers remain necessary to facilitate business operations. And so I was putting these all on schedules when they came in of their 90 days and extending the 90 days for a lot of these businesses, because as you're aware, the urgency ordinances were continually to be updated. They're continuing to be in place. And so I felt that it would be, as long as those emergency orders are in place, that the that the businesses be allowed to operate their temporary outdoor dining, temporary use permits. And then basically section 5 states termination. The ordinance shall take effect immediately and shall remain in effect until the expiration of the declaration of local emergency by the Pinole City Council. I don't know if you guys as a council formally. Yeah, so we're working with the businesses because a lot of the businesses are still trying to recover. And we wanted to put a process in place, and there was a lot of positive feedback from the public regarding public outreach. The commissioners on, but they're there. Okay. So, and so we wanted to work with those. And so that when we are ready to silence the temporary use permits, that they have a process that they can go to obtain additional for outdoor dining. Out of the businesses that are remaining, the 3 that are there severely want their outdoor dining and want their dining to maintain. And there are some other businesses that have been talking to us regarding creating a permanent structure for their businesses as well. So we didn't really have that in place. And so we're working with these businesses to make sure we can transition them into some programs and do that. And we'll go into this PowerPoint. So this is kind of more of the background of what's happened over the last kind of 3 years. Dave, if you can go to the first slide, please. So, okay, go. Oh, wow. Yeah. So basically, again, just that there are 10 temporary use permits, 9 within the parking lots and 1 on the street. There are 3 active that are still, and that's Pear Street Bistro, Tina's, and Sue's Place. Mel's Diner just closed theirs, and I think the last storms took out like 2 or 3 of them, and so they haven't replaced them. So if you go to the next slide, Dave. So this is what we have as part of our current outdoor regulation. This is it. This is the whole caboodle of everything we do. And as you can see, we have some required findings that are to be made. It's done by the zoning administrator. It's principally used outdoor, maybe permitted in all the zoning districts except for residential zoning districts. And so it's pretty nominal in what these things are doing and what people are wanting. And so to upgrade to an outdoor dining / parklet type program will allow us to do a full vetting of this program and inspire things to happen later in the downtown, as well as other commercial areas that might need to if they want outdoor dining. The next slide, Dave. So the kind of what we're doing here is part of the purpose of creating these is basically to develop policies for outdoor dining and to develop, public and private projects, and of course, high priority given to creating comfortable, enjoyable, and aesthetically pleasing public spaces. So we're looking at, trying to create a better looking downtown, a better looking side streets, or just allow for some different things that haven't been normally done here in Pinole. The purpose of the guidelines would help clarify and provide standards for parklets for the city of Pinole merchants in order to enhance the quality. Right now, we do not have any really standards for parklets. I mean, outdoor dining, we have stuff, but we have really nothing for parklets. And so as part of our outdoor dining parklet program, we would include all of that in together. And we'll talk more about that. And of course, that these goals are consistent with the vision of the 3 corridor specific plan. And compliance with all applicable sections of the guidelines is required at all times, whether it's insurance, clearance requirements, drainage requirements, et cetera. So if you go to the next slide, please. So for some if you could just throw them all up there. Thank you. So for the topics of discussion tonight, basically we're defining categories of outdoor dining as on sidewalks, dining areas, and parking spaces in the right of way, on public property, parklets, and on private property, and of course, outdoor dining areas. We want to establish a permitting process for outdoor dining, including opportunities for public input, annual reviews or inspections, one-time or annual fees, maintenance and liability. using the 3 corridor specific plan and zoning ordinance to describe the locations where different categories or outdoor dining areas allowed through the permitting process. Of course, we have a whole regional commercial side of the city that it's not included in the specific plan, but there could be areas in that either development or redevelopment of those areas that might want some outdoor dining or to have some type of, what we consider a parklet within the center that they have. So, so making sure that we've included all of our areas. Let's go to the next slide, please. We also want to establish standards for the design of materials, accessibility, circulation, of course, the lighting and safety features, guardrails, wheel stops, all of the things that are important to make sure that our residents are safe or our visitors are safe when they're out there eating out in their outdoor dining area. We want to establish standards that address use of the hours, public access and equity. Consider encouraging other elements such as public art, bicycle parking. So there's a lot of things there. And we also want to address the transition from the temporary outdoor dining areas to the permanent outdoor dining areas, so that these people are allowed that have it, they want to continue it, that they could, there's a process that we can move them in. We can move them into it. Go to the next slide, Dave. And so basically kind of just what are their categories of definitions? And these are basically the 3 major areas. Of course, the sidewalk dining area is pretty explanatory. These are located on public and private sidewalks, usually adjacent to the buildings such as Tina's and Bear Claw. We got some right up there. The private outdoor dining areas, these are areas that are located on private property that serves a restaurant or cafe and may be incorporated in the private parking lots, outdoor patios, recess entries immediately adjacent to the public right of way, and alleys adjacent to the operating business. So, and I've got some photos to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at. And of course, the definition of a parklet. These are areas that are typically curbside parking spaces in the right of way that have converted to public seating platforms. They are extended to provide amenities, green space, or recreational areas to the public. In some areas, the purposes of a community parklet, basically to maximize a sense of the community and making sure to create features of interest so that for informal gatherings, so that it's, if there are people that just want to, come sit on a Saturday afternoon, read the paper and just kick back, they've got a place where they can just do that. And be a safe place. So if we go to the next slide, please. So this is kind of, again, your sidewalk dining. This is what we're looking at as terms of sidewalk dining, where the right of way, where the public sidewalk is, the walkway really isn't infringed, but you've got tables right up against the building. And you have them, and you also have on the sidewalks. You go to the next slide, Dave. Again, sidewalk dining. In this case, the sidewalk's a little wider, so the tables are kind of on the outside, but they're adjacent to the building, and they're used for public gathering. And they also have as you can see, they've got the walking right of way where people can walk and it's not disturbed. And then of course up against the building. Go to the next slide. So, and this is your private outdoor dining area. So we've seen these where, for example, Pear Street Bistro is one of these areas where it's outside the building, it's adjacent to their building. However, it's on private property. It's not even though it's boxed in. But this is another example of what a private outdoor dining. So if you go to the next slide, Dave. And again, how they use the parking lot, similar to Tina's. Tina's is more of a private outdoor dining area as well. So it just gives you an idea of using the sidewalks or using the parking lots as those areas. Go to the next slide, Dave. And of course, the parklet. So basically the platform, as you can see, that extends out into the public right of way. It's balanced. It shows the drainage. It's got the tables and chairs and that. So we've seen these in a lot of different communities. Go to the next slide, Dave. And again, this is one with structures. And these are some of the things that when we get to the next set of stuff that we want to talk about and how we want to envision these things. Of course, you've got the landscaping, you've got kind of like a barrier on the side in the front with a pretty wide bit. So okay, so you go to the next slide, Dave. Okay, so pretty much this part of the presentation is where we really want to get kind of some specifics from the commission to help on and help put together a framework for count to be able to go to the council and say, this is a framework that we want to build. And these are some of the specific things that we want to do as part of the program. So basically, is establish a permit processing for outdoor dining and what that looks like. There are a number of different ways, a lot of different cities do it. You have an administrative permit process approved by either the planning manager or community development director with no public input. It's just, they come in, they submit their plan and it gets approved. A hearing process, whether it's a administrative use permit, CUP, zoning administrator permit, a new outdoor dining permit, which is going to be something that we want to establish its own permit for outdoor dining through the zoning administrator with an appeal right to the planning commission to be approved. And so then I guess another hearing process with the AAU, CUP, ZA through that's approved by the planning commission with an appeal to the city council. And of course, the final is basically a hearing process that gets comes to the planning commission, then the planning commission provides a recommendation to the city council. So those are the four styles. I mean, if there's something else that the commission would like to talk about, we can talk about those as well. But those are usually the type of processes that we would like to put in place for these. And we would like planning commission feedback on that. So if we go to the next slide. So and then using the 3 corridor specific plan and zoning ordinance to describe locations, because we know that not every place would be available, would be a perfect spot for these. And so basically, as part of the permitting process, this, we would look at using the zoning, potentially GIS map processing to outline specific areas of the plan or areas for the city for outdoor dining to be allowed. Using the commercial mixed use, residential mixed use, RMU zoning areas of the specific plan for different styles of outdoor dining, meaning maybe in the residential mixed use, we only use the sidewalk dining, private outdoor, where in the commercial mixed use, we would use, parklets and use all 3, or even using the regional commercial area as that as well. So looking at using different to describe the locations, different categories of outdoor dining, of where these would fit in the zoning ordinance and how we would make them all consistent. Go on the next slide, please. So again, we've seen these before. We've established standards for design and materials, size, landscaping, accessibility, circulation, lighting, safety, all the stuff. I've included different barriers, lightweight and heavyweight barriers, that if these are things that we want to include as part of our policy, like the commission to kind of, recommend some of those and go move forward. I kind of gave some examples on the side with the big cement parklet with the reflector stick, and then of course the big landscape box as well. So just kind of give you an idea of, do we allow for, do we want guardrails or wheel stops or physical vertical elements? So these are some things that I'm asking for tonight, in a way. So if we go to the next slide. And basically establish standards for design and materials, size, landscaping, accessibility, circulation, safety features, of course, again, with the guardrail, wheel stops with the preferred, but also heating for air circulation, outdoor furniture. How, are we going to require lighting? If we do allow lighting, are they low to the ground? Are they the can lights that, come up? Are they, there's actually a lot of design elements for these that can be used. A lot of cities use a lot of different styles of lighting and that, and of course in this picture they show the heat lamps and they've got some lighting on that as well. So you go to the next slide, Dave. So again, this was established standards that address use for hours, public access, and equity. As you see in this case, the parklet's basically taking up 2 or 3 park spots. It's got bicycle parking. I kind of added the public art because it's killed 2 birds with 1 stone in a sense. But it created some art. It created some art, but it also included some bike parking as well, so that people can come down, park their bikes, and use the parklets and that. And if we want we want bike parking within those areas. Establish hours of operation, meaning that, you know, businesses, whoever is the applicant or whoever is the business owner of the parklet or that, do we say, you know, hey, from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. basically there's no use, you've got to be cleared out, they block them off, they, you know, all of those types of things. Are the you know, standard agreement with the city if it's in the public right of way. So we need to work with business owners to establish this, maybe a standard agreement that if, especially when they're doing parklets and when they're doing private patios and stuff, because they are leaving themselves, businesses, with a pathway that they've got to keep clear, and if chairs and tables are getting moved and those types of things and that. So those are things that we also need to look at. Go to the next slide, Dave. Okay, and then this is pretty much to address the transition from temporary outdoor dining areas to permanent outdoor dining areas. So basically setting the timetable for converting from temporary program to new program, you know, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. I mean, I just threw in some timeframes that I think might be, you know, depending on where we're at. Work with existing businesses to address new design program and institute a potential fee deferral program for compliance. So something that we could take a look at and these are only for the businesses that have these temporary use permits that want to convert to a more permanent outdoor, or a full amnesty program for existing businesses who want to have an outdoor dining area. So basically they wouldn't pay any fees, at least they would just have to submit their design concepts, and we would just review their design concepts and go under the new program. So next slide. Okay, so yeah, again, it's a parklets. Okay, so you go back to the slide before, Dave. Thank you. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay. So anyway, so that's kind of where we are at tonight, and what we're trying to do here is try to create some specificity to go to the council to make sure that, you know, that when we do accept, we do an outdoor dining policy, that we include a lot of these different and so we can address some of these issues tonight, take those in front of the council. If that's something that the council wants to continue to work on and direct us back to staff, then we'll put all the meats and bones into these programs, in which we will probably do a public outreach program to the businesses. It'll be a full scale, you know, so that everybody's on board with it. And then, you know, maybe using the planning ad hoc committee as well to kind of, you know, not circumvent, but to speed up the process in a lot of ways before it gets to the planning commission. So, because everything's got to be approved by the planning commission, everything's got to be approved by the city council. So it's just using ad hoc to kind of put together the program along with staff and that. So with that ends my presentation. I know you have questions and answers. Hopefully I'll have the answers for you, and we can move forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Hannum. First, I just have a couple of things before we break out. And what I'd like you to do is to specify exactly what you want to come out of this meeting tonight. So I think why don't you go ahead and explain exactly what you want to come out of this meeting tonight, and then we'll make sure that we're all on board as far as an understanding of that.
Well, basically what I'm looking for is part of as outlined in the staff report. I'm looking to, you know, in terms of establishing a permitting process, does the commission want to establish a permitting process? What's just in terms of specificity, would you want it to be more of a, you know, a ministerial program or a public hearing process? I'm looking for locations that you feel that would be the best portion for the city to include these areas. Also,
So basically what you want is for us to address each of those bullets that you have.
Yeah.
And give you at least a beginning suggestion of the things that we as commissioners feel would be appropriate for those particular things.
Yeah, because we're building a framework, and because we don't have all the answers, we don't have all the policies, but we want to at least get to the council with, a pretty good framework of what these policies are going to kind of look at.
Okay. So with that said, then before I think the process that we'll use, if it makes sense to you guys, is that we'll go through each point and we'll have Mr. Snow go to that slide.
Yeah.
With all of that there, and then we can make a discussion of each of those points, point by point, and add what our suggestions are, our discussion is, how that ends up.
Yeah.
And then move on to the next point and kind of go through there. So for us now, as far as questions, before we move to that discussion, go ahead and see if I'm on the right track here, that if there are questions outside of that, there are other points that we would want to add to it, or if you have some clarifications as far as what your understanding is of what we're to do tonight, or what the purpose is, or something like that. So let's keep those general at this point, and then we'll go to specific points. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, then let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and start with Mr. Menes.
So I've got some general questions to start with.
Okay.
First off, at what point in this process are we going to be inviting public comment?
Once we've gone to the council and the council has directed us to move forward with creating the policy.
No, I mean, within this item tonight, are we going to do it after the first round of more general questions? Or are we going to do it after we go through each point?
We can do it either way, however the commission would like to take that. I mean, you could, after each point that you've done, if there's public comment there, you can ask for public comment. Alex, is that about?
I would suggest you do that perhaps once the commission goes through all of their questions on the different topics to take public comment at that point.
Okay, and then my second question was, I think Chair Moriarty said something about getting the opinion of the various commissioners. And I was wondering whether what you were looking for was the opinion of the commission as a whole in a vote on a draft policy, or whether you're still at the sort of idea gathering phase.
Well, I would want the commission tonight to come to a consensus of like in a product area, so to establish a permitting process, but at least come together and vote on a consensus of this is the way we want it, that you want to move forward with the policy to move forward.
Okay.
So I'm not looking for like individual. I'm looking for you as a commission to make those recommendations. I mean, all of your comments will come together, and then you guys will vote on, is this something we want to move forward to the council, and then just take a consensus vote, and then we go on to the next topic area.
Okay, and then finally, I guess I should note with regards to ex parte communications, because I think this is the appropriate point to bring it up, that I had, first off, I have more general ex parte communication of sending out information about this meeting, as I do routinely for various city meetings, to my email list. And secondarily, that I had an ex parte conversation in particular with Tina Holtzclaw, the owner of Tia's Place, about this topic a few months back. I don't think we got into any particularly great detail, but it was the sort of thing I should know.
Okay.
And that's all my questions for right now.
Mr. Benzel?
As far as the recommendations the council's going to, or commission is going to present, say, for example, for the first item, you want us to actually kind of vote on, like, yes, we like, for example, bullet point number 2, for example, versus we're okay with 2 or 3, or working within those confines. You actually want us to get to a, yes, we like this particular
Yeah,
method.
I mean, if the commission, if there are a couple of ways that you'd like to do it, then I kind of want everything, but if you can narrow it down to one, that'd be great.
Okay.
But if you feel that some of the other ones need to be explored, then we need to, we'll include them both.
Okay.
Something like that.
That's my feeling as well. I mean, not to come, for us to come down to a vote, yes or no, we say it can only be 10 feet from the X or
Yeah,
something
we're not,
like
right.
that.
we're not going that deep, at least at this point, but we are. But if, for example, you say that, yes, we need to include distances, we need to include sizes as part of, similar to parking stalls within the city of Pinole. Or similar to if we use a bike parking area or a cover. You know, we want to make sure that there are policies and procedure or guidelines that address covers and tents or those types of things. So wherein we'll because we will get into the weeds of 20 foot by 9, blue, green, yellow, all the objective standards in terms of making sure they make drainage requirements, all that kind of stuff. That's not what we're doing tonight.
Okay.
Yeah. Because that we don't have all those. We don't have that. This is more of just setting the policy framework.
In a general direction.
Yeah.
Mr. Martinez?
Thanks, Chair Moriarty. I guess when I look at the framework that's being presented, I appreciate you, city staff, for putting together a pretty thoughtful group of examples on potential permit process, and maybe having a permit center that identifies and establishes what the city is responsible for, and then what the building owner or applicant would be responsible for. And so when we start looking at the administrative side of what that process looks like and how we build this out, I think your third option, the hearing process, AUP, CUP, ZA permit, and a new outdoor dining permit through the planning commission with an appeal to the council. That one seems to me, I just have the feeling that would be a good process. And in there, we could include the design review to ensure that, we're 6 feet from the curb, or if it's parallel parking, we have the 15 feet with the special concrete barriers and 48 inches high and all of that. So we could get into the weeds down the road, but having this formalized process that we create and having it follow pretty similar to most of the things that we usually do in terms with any new building within planning commission. That third option seems to me like it would fit along with what we traditionally, how we handle projects. So that's just kind of my thoughts on it. But that's the one I kind of feel follows what we traditionally do here in planning commission. But I'm open to hearing any other, getting any other ideas from the team. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Martinez. Before we discuss that permitting process in particular, do you have any other general questions or comments or other things that you felt we need to also address, besides parking standards, encouraging, blah, 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 et cetera? And then we'll come back to that first bullet.
Well, there's obviously, as we go through the other bullets, I have a number of different things that we need to be aware of.
Right,
but
and we'll
if
take
we're just
those
looking at this part,
bullet
yeah,
by bullet. Yeah.
right. But if we're just saying, okay, as an administrative body with these permits that are going to go underneath it, if we're doing parklets, it's one process. If it's outdoor dining, it's another one. If it's, approving somebody that's going to put outdoor dining in their parking lot, what are the requirements or what are the guidelines for that? We'll definitely get there. But I'm trying to point out, I guess, in this, the first step is I would be okay with putting a permit process in place that says you need to meet the AUP, CUP, ZA, apply for this planning permit, and that would need to be presented at some point to planning commission. And then with that option that if there's something more and above that required to comply with us, it can also go up to city council for approval.
Okay, great. Thank you. Before, Mr. Current, before we continue with that discussion about the permitting process, do you have any other questions about the general, the idea or any other things that we should add?
Yes, I do. And I just want to state that I think going bullet by bullet with the analysis is the proper way of doing it. Before I did that, we go to that, I just wanted some clarification on the existing outdoor dining that we have left, which is Tina's, Sue's Cafe and Pear Street Bistro, because they all kind of bring in a different type of encroachment. First of all, I'd like to know from Tina's, which is in the back there and is taking up about 3 or 4 parking spots of the parking lot that's behind it. My question is that do those parking spots belong to Tina's or are they part of the city's parking lot?
I'm not positive, but I think they're Tina's.
They are Tina's, okay.
I'm not positive. I'll have to research that to verify.
Okay. And Sue's Cafe is a parklet out in the street, so that's pretty clear. It's taking part of the right of way. Pear Street Bistro, it's between the Pinole Bank building and the Pear Street Bistro, there's a walkway there. Was that a city walkway or is that part of Tina's property? I'm not Tina's, Pear Street Bistro's property.
It was part of both properties. It was part of it is Pear Street Bistro's, part of it was the city of Pinole. So in fact, the majority of it was the city's at one point, but when they sold the building to the private, so now I think the owner of Pear Street owns that building now. But they had a lease agreement that they could use that right away. There was it wasn't a public right of way per se for people to cut through it.
Yeah, because when I went there today to look at it, I noticed that Pear Street Bistro is taking over the Bank of Pinole building and using it for venues and I guess expansion of the restaurant. So it does appear to be like a natural flow there, that it's all part, it's all one big Pear Street Bistro of the 2 buildings. So yeah, those are my questions. The reason I was asking those questions is because I am concerned about the giveaway of public property. And if, and because I think that's a different kettle of worms compared to if the establishments are just using spaces that they already own. That's why I was asking that questions. And with that, I'm, ready to go bullet by bullet.
Okay, so actually, that is a very valid question that we should make sure is recorded to go to the city council in terms of how do we establishing, is it city property or is it private property that we're talking about?
Right.
For each one, and that will probably cause a different kind of thing, so. Okay.
Well, and that's where all the agreements would come in, depending on if they're using parklets, because that's city right of way. So that would be, as we go through these bullets and we get farther down that road, then we'll be discussing what we need to do for that particular area. But let's make sure we don't forget that. So.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Then we have the establishing the permitting process right here for outdoor dining, including opportunities for public input, annual renewal or inspections, one-time and annual fees, maintenance and liability.
Right.
So that first, do we have 2 slides on this or just the one?
There's actually, I think there's one.
And actually, and I think there's the first bullet there about the categories, which is on page 3.
Oh, sorry, right. So defining the categories first. So if we topics of discussions, do we have a specific slide for looking at the different categories?
Well, different categories, yeah. If you go to the pictures, Dave, different categories are. Okay, that's the first one, sidewalk dining area. Okay, so that's the first category of this. That's the private outdoor dining, which is adjacent Stop right there. Okay, go back one more. There you go. That's the private outdoor dining area. That is it's on private property, but it's taking up, existing parking. And then the parklet, of course, is on, right over the sidewalk and with the platforms. Yeah, there's the other parklet. So those are the three categories.
Okay. What kind of discussion can we have about that?
Well, I have some thoughts on that.
All right.
I didn't want to skip that.
Right, I appreciate that. Thank you, Commissioner Curran. Please go ahead.
I am very much against the parklets of utilizing this Pinole right away, especially on the streets. And my reasoning of that is severalfold. One, I think there's some safety issues when you're actually extending a seated dining area out to the street. It could be vulnerable for traffic that could actually swerve, or if there's parking spots, if it's adjacent to a parking spot, it has been known that people will sometimes press the gas pedal when they want to put the brake. And I think there were some examples of parklets, I think down in San Jose or something like that, where somebody did run into a dining area. So I don't see a great opportunity for parklets. It's interesting that only one establishment, Sue's Cafe, has actually taken advantage of the opportunity to have parklets during the pandemic. And I just think that there's, in my mind, I really don't see any good places in the city where we can give up parking spots and have parklets. And the other, and I think the whole parklet idea creates some issues as far as ownership and maintenance goes, because the city does own the street, it does own the parking lots. And, I think it would be a path we may not want to go down as far as defining who can use that parklet. I think that, David, when you were giving your presentation, you were talking about how it could be like a reading area or stuff like that. I think that the establishment that builds that parklet would probably want to have ownership of it, but I don't know if we can actually grant them ownership of it. And there's a question of maintenance. So I'm saying that, suggesting that we immediately don't consider parklets at all. And I think that will make the rest of our discussion a lot easier when we're just looking at, eating areas that are either part of a strip mall parking spot or part of the establishment. So I'm making a recommendation that we don't allow parklets.
And just to confirm that you have nothing against them, the sidewalk dining areas or the outdoor dining areas?
No, I do not. Do
Okay.
not. And I think the parklets were nice during the pandemic, but we're not in a pandemic anymore. I think we're in the epidemic stage. So they served their purpose, and I think that they no longer have a viability in the city of Pinole. But yes, I am for the sidewalk dining. I am, any other outdoor dining, just not encroaching onto the street.
Okay, so that's a reasonable discussion. To be honest, I think for something like this, we probably may not come to a conclusion as a recommendation from the Planning Commission. But if we don't, we want to make sure that comment is brought up.
Right.
Okay, so Mr. Benzuli?
Yeah, I'm actually in favor of the parklets. I'm in favor of the sidewalk and the private outdoor as well, but I think the parklets are actually a good idea. I like the flexibility they bring to eating establishments for that they'll maybe have access to the sidewalk or private. I do definitely agree with David's concerns about the safety issue. And maybe one of the recommendations you make is that based on where that parklet is, the police department or public works makes some recommendations about safety barriers or reinforcements depending on where it's at, to beef up that reinforcement. A place like Sue's Place is more off on the side street, so that's not maybe as much of an issue, but something that's on Pinole Valley Road or Satin Pablo would be a totally different story. So maybe that is one of those that during the design review, they say, well, how are you right sizing that reinforcement or that barrier based on the traffic and the speed and everything that's going on with that street? And maybe that's something police department weighs in on. And then I think the maintenance and the liability portion of that we would make a recommendation that gets somehow sorted out. That, the city maintains the streets, but the people who own or have that parklet would have some liability to maintain that, provide insurance
Right.
for it.
And that would all be part of the permitting process.
Yeah. Otherwise, I didn't have any issues with the sidewalk or the private outdoor dining areas.
Great. Let's go to Mr. Menes.
So I would say that at this point, it might be worthwhile to restructure our conversation a bit, because it sounds like we have a consensus that sidewalks and outdoor dining areas sort of as broad categories are acceptable, and that our main dispute is over the parklet category. So can we maybe have a vote to approve the categories of sidewalk and outdoor dining area as they've been presented, and that they would be acceptable as they are?
I think not. I think we'll make a full recommendation, and we'll include in that recommendation that we say, yes, this sounds good. Yes, this sounds good. We have questions about this. So let's go ahead and keep it and not do subcategories of these bullet points, if that's all right. I appreciate what you're saying, and I think we can hold those together.
Okay, just figured that might be somewhat simpler, but like the other commissioners so far, I actually have a slight bit of an issue with the sidewalk dining areas, because at least some of the images presented looked like the dining areas were encroaching into the right of way in ways that would have blocked, say, wheelchair access. There were chairs and or tables that were right in the middle of the sidewalk. And I'd want to make sure that we would avoid that if we were going to have sidewalk dining areas in particular, because I think there would be a higher risk of blocking access and equity concerns there than there would be with parklets or with outdoor dining areas, because sidewalks are also the public right of way.
Right.
And there's also concerns associated there. With regard to parklets, I think that the fact that they go somewhat into the public right of way could be an advantage. And I believe we've also discussed this somewhat at the design review subcommittee meetings when we discussed the topic of parklets more generally. We had a bunch of examples. We talked a bit about how various cities had come up with their parklet ordinances, how it had functionally worked out in practice, ways various things had worked out. It might have been useful to have some of that information in tonight's presentation, but at the same time, it was a bit bulky. So I understand the desire to keep the presentation relatively slimmed down. But I would argue that if designed properly, and I do think that design standards should be explicitly part of the ordinance with regards to parklets in particular, that parklets can act as traffic calming measures and traffic safety measures, precisely because they do extend out into the public right of way, and because they're different from your typical car or your typical parking. It draws the driver's attention. It sort of disrupts the natural flow of the street. So it makes people be more cautious when they're driving, be more aware of their environment. And I'm not sure of this, but I haven't heard of any instance with people, driving into the Sue's Place Parkway or anything like that. Has the city heard about any issues of that nature?
No, I mean, there's been a few close calls, but there hasn't been any reported accidents into the structure.
Okay, so yeah.
I did mention that, I believe there was some instances in San Jose where there was a car that ran into a parklet.
Yeah, so I think it would be important to ensure that the parklets are built to be able to withstand at least glancing impacts. But I think that the very fact that they're in the public right of way could potentially have beneficial traffic calming impacts in places like, for example, San Pablo Avenue, the Old Town segment going from Tennant out to the Hercules Bridge and out to Oak Ridge, where we're often concerned about excessively high rates of speed of traffic, that having sort of traffic calming measures there that fit within the limited amount that the state and county let us modify that area would allow for calming measures that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So I'm pro parklet. But I do think that we need to make sure that it's done safely and that there are design standards that make it clear that it's built out safely. It's not just some ramshackle thing that will fall over in a stiff breeze or if it gets bumped by a bicycle.
Right.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Martinez?
Thank you. As one, I would say that I'm in favor of all three ideas: parklets, outdoor dining, sidewalk dining. But in regard to Commissioner Menace's comments regarding the safety part of it, the fact that we would need to absolutely do our very best work to ensure the safety is really key. Because although we only have the one parklet, which is Sue's Place, I'll give you an example. I went for tacos at Sue's Place a while back, and I actually parked in the parking space between her parklet and San Pablo Avenue. There's one parking spot. And so when I came out with my tacos, just as I made the step to enter into the street, because I was where her parklet ends and where the end of my car was, just as I started to look out, because it was blocking, a big F-250 went roaring by. And had I been 1 second faster, I could have possibly been hurt. Now, the challenge with the design on that is that you cannot see, because it's not clear on all sides, so you can see all the way around it. So I couldn't see that the truck was coming. And sadly, I didn't even hear the truck coming. So I think safety really has to be a key component of the parklets. If we're going to approve them, we really need to have a pretty solid process saying it can go as high as 48 inches of solid or whatever kind of barrier we want to do, whether it's fencing or whatever. But after that 48 inches up to 6 foot or 8 foot, whatever that's going to be, it must be clear. Plexiglass, something, so that the example that I just gave you eliminates that potential risk for someone to be hurt just for walking to their car. So again, I'm very pro this. I just want to make sure that if we're going to do parklets, that we do them as thoughtfully as possible, but also ensuring that we've got design and safety elements that are really clearly defined for these business owners. Thank you.
Excellent. Commissioner Curran, if anything else came up, I'm gonna summarize this in just a moment, but if anything else came up during this that you want to make sure is included, please go ahead and state it now.
No, I think I made my argument. I think Frankie's, I was concerned about the safety and visibility myself. I didn't bring it up. But I think that is a concern. I think that if we do have parklets, that we're definitely going to have cement barriers to protect the, the diners. But like I said, I think there's just a lot of complexities that involve parklets as opposed to sidewalk dining and areas in owner, where there's in private parking lots. So I think we're going to probably spend a lot of our time trying to, to come up with regulations for parklets. And I just don't see the value of them.
Great. Any other? Okay, then I think the discussion needs to continue on that, and I'm not sure in our community that parklets make a whole lot of sense, but I could see someone like Sue's Place saying, wait a minute, they can have this, but we don't have any space for that, but we're using this. And so, I think that discussion should go forward. But so I think what we're not completely in agreement, and I think you can record that. But except for that, we're in favor of sidewalk dining areas so long as there is room. I'm questioning whether Sabor Latino, they have tables out in front of their restaurant, if that is adequate. So, but it does need to be delineated as far as what the amount is specifically. And outdoor dining areas, we're in favor of both of those. And the question comes with parklets, with the main consideration being are looking at owner maintenance and liability, looking at design standards that they appear more permanent rather than very temporary. That safety is one of the highest considerations. And so that will determine both the dimensions and what materials are used as far as clarity and being able to see. Also, I think, so in there is the design standards, and I think another pro kind of thing is that idea of there being traffic calming, slowing things down if possible. So safety, traffic calming being a good thing there, thinking about safety of in terms of materials and visibility.
Okay.
So before we would make any final recommendation, I think, we'd want to make sure that we were in agreement about those with parklets.
Right, I mean, if you have a consensus regarding those items, then we can move forward to the next, whatever the consensus for the.
I think so.
Commissioners.
Did I catch it? For everything, I think. Okay, then let's go ahead and we'll go back next to the permitting process.
Mhm. So, and maybe I can give you kind of more of an example of the permitting process as well. Dave, can you go to the permitting process before? I gotta go back. Okay, right. Okay, so establish this. What I want to make sure is that for right now, the way the permit acts right now is that the process is it's an administrative use permit approved by staff and move forward. So that's kind of how that's our existing. If you go back to the zoning code that I put up there earlier, that's how that gets approved. And I have to make certain specific findings through that. Now, so in terms of a hearing process, we've got 4 different ways of doing a hearing process. We have an administrative use permit that can go through the zoning administrator. They can go through the planning commission. They can be recommended to go to the city council. Okay, so, or it can be approved. And Alex, correct me if I'm wrong. Can in terms of the ministerial project, can staff use the admin design committee, ad hoc committee at all for recommendations or?
No.
That's what I
I
thought,
mean,
okay.
yeah.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I understood that. So it would either be through the staff process or one of the, through the zoning administrator, which is a public hearing process. We have a specific process from the zoning administrator. It requires us to notice 300 feet from the area and have a hearing where people can come in and then if they don't like the conditions or approval or put forth by the zoning administrator, then it can be appealed to the planning commission. You as planning commissioners can appeal my decisions as well, if I'm not mistaken, on the zoning administrator permit. If as citizens, the planning commission can appeal.
Any citizen can appeal. You'd have to pay a fee, and in general, I would not recommend it because you presumably create a conflict that you cannot then participate in the hearing.
So, yeah. So, I mean, there's an appeal body to to the planning commission. And then, of course, we have the conditional use permit or the outdoor dining permit through the planning commission with appeal to the city council. So we would have to follow the conditional use permit process. That's the one we have right now. Unless we create a new hearing process for this item. So I'm just giving you what we have is existing, or if there's something that you want to use as an outdoor dining permit, which would then either go through one of the four, what I would call one of the four, either through the zoning administrator, through staff administratively, the zoning administrator, through the planning commission, through the city council.
Yeah, hang on just a sec. So I just want to confirm that when we say a permitting process for outdoor dining, we're including all three categories.
All three categories are included.
Okay,
So if someone came in for a parklet, or if someone came in for an outdoor dining area, or if somebody came in for the third one, the private, they would all go through that same
Okay.
process.
all right. so-
Or if the commission wants, you could, I mean, even though it's be a little bulky, depending on what they come in for, you could require maybe a parklet to do a little higher standard, or the other thing, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, I mean, you can do that.
Yeah, you could absolutely, excuse me, absolutely define different processes for different types of.
Excellent. Okay, and this might be where Commissioner Current comes in, but let's go ahead. We'll start with Mr. Benzuli.
Yeah, actually, that's actually the question I had, is if we could create a separate process, potentially the different types. But the other question I had was, on an ad hoc committee, can we do this through an ad hoc? If we say, it got to go to the planning commission, can it be through the ad hoc? Or does it have to go through the full planning commission?
It has to go through the full planning commission. The ad hoc committee has no authority to make any decisions.
Okay, even if, okay. So I guess that was my questions. Do we can also do comments?
Yep,
I think for the parklets, it does make sense to go to the planning commission with people having concerns about safety and construction and all that stuff. That should at least get to us so we can really see it and look at it before it gets approved. I think the other two ones, the sidewalk dining and the kind of the private dining, it seems heavy-handed to go all the way to the planning commission for someone that just wants to stick out some tables and chairs on the sidewalk or do something on their private land. And I'm wondering if maybe that's an opportunity to go, once we establish some sort of minimum standards, they can do that quicker through, the planning manager or sort of through zoning and not have to go all the way here. Just, it costs more to go to us than it probably costs to put sidewalk and chairs in. So I could see there being a tiered process for the parklets, which is maybe a little bit more, and then everything else is maybe more ministerial.
okay, anything else? Nope, all right. Mr. Menace?
So I think that first off, I don't think that we necessarily need to go to step 4, that basically making a recommendation to city council, because as I understand that, and of course, Alex, and correct me if I'm wrong here, ordinarily that sort of thing is for something that ultimately falls under the council's authority, like for example, the affordable housing covenants or, things where the city needs to bind itself. And historically speaking, as Vice Chair Martinez noted, the Planning Commission has had the power to make decisions on conditional use permits and things of this nature without needing to kick it up to the council. And so I think that all of this at the highest should just end up here, because frankly, the council has a lot of stuff that it's dealing with at any given time, and it doesn't really need more if we can avoid it. With regards to the multi-tier process, I do think that for the outdoor dining areas, that it might be worth having, that it might be more reasonable having that be an ministerial permit process, possibly a hearing process, depending on whether we want public comment on that or not. But I do think that for sidewalk areas as well as for parklets, that we would want the planning commission process, because sidewalk areas do potentially present the challenge of, impeding public access to the sidewalk and that whole right of way. And that could be an area where particular communities want to give input on a particular area of sidewalk where they're like, oh, hey, this particular chunk of sidewalk is the only access we have because, say, for example, in some parts of the city, we've got a giant hill filled with gravel where there is no sidewalk underneath it, or a long stretch where there is no sidewalk, it's private property or whatever. And so there'd be more of an impact if there were to be outdoor dining there, not outdoor dining, I think, what was the term Art we used? It was
The private outdoor dining areas or the sidewalk dining areas.
the sidewalk dining areas, yes. So I think there's enough potential variance in the sidewalk dining areas that having the planning commission process for those as well as the parklets would be worthwhile. I definitely agree that it should definitely go to that level for the parklets. And then I also noted before we move on that under the bullet point for establish the permitting process, there were a few other items there, not just the what kind of process we want to do, but annual renewal or inspections, one-time and annual fees, maintenance and liability. Are we also providing input on those right now, or are we just focusing on the kind of process?
Yeah, I mean, if you think that either an annual review or inspection, so once you've approved it, if you think that there should be annual renewals or inspections or one time or annual fees, meaning that you pay a one-time administrative fee, then do they pay annual fees or do they just pay annual fees for maintenance and liability? So, I mean, those would be part of the conditions of approval that in terms of maintenance and liability, but we want to make sure that those are added if it's something that the commission wants to, that we add those in. So that we tell the council that policy needs to include those items as well.
Okay. I'm not sure if there would necessarily need to be an annual renewal of the permit. I do think that annual inspections would probably be a good idea, especially of parklets, but to a lesser extent, outdoor dining areas and sidewalk areas as well. I think that fees should be established based on the nexus of staff costs, because I know that the city recently went through a whole process where it reevaluated its entire fee structure around planning fees and made some pretty substantial changes because it turned out that we were assigning fees inappropriately to certain categories and not to others. I don't recall the exact reasoning, but I think it would be important to make sure that the nexus of the fee was appropriate. But that, for example, if we're going to have annual inspections, that maybe the fee structure would be annual to cover the cost of that sort of thing.
Right.
I do think that there should be a requirement for maintenance incumbent on the property owner in particular, because they're the ones gaining the primary benefit of the improvement, and they should be the ones responsible for maintenance and liability, though I could perhaps see an argument for partially split liability with regards to parklets, since that's going into the city's right of way. But I definitely think that maintenance should be the responsibility of the private property owner, because they're the ones making the improvement. They should make sure that it's kept up to par, and that should definitely be in the conditions of approval. And I think that's all my comments on the permitting process bullet point.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Martinez.
Thank you. I like Commissioner Menace's comments and appreciate the fact that, yes, we do need to, as part of this process, the conditional of approval, I would really like to see that we have any of these outdoor activities, that they are insured properly. And I think at a minimum, that insurance policy should be well over $1 million for any incident. So that takes away some of the liability from the city. I do really strongly feel that if we grant a parklet or an outdoor dining area or anything on the street, that are the organizations that would have this new capability would also be responsible, just like if it were a normal restaurant, for cleaning it daily, removing any debris such as leaves, such as litter. I really appreciate the fact that as an example, the party that owns the Trader Joe's shopping area, on a regular basis, I see folks coming out there and picking up litter, emptying the trash cans on a pretty regular basis. I'd like to see us add components in there that we're very clear to anybody if we're granting them additional area to have a business, that our expectation is that place looks like new all the time. It can't be, worn out components, that they need to keep up on the maintenance of this stuff, and that it would be renewed every year. Somebody's got to look at it and make sure that everything is up to snuff. So those are some of the key areas that I'd like to see in this. And I guess just historically, if we looked at some of the work that we did with, as an example, East Bay Coffee, when they wanted the outdoor entertainment venue, that traditionally had to come to Planning Commission. And the reason is folks around there, the noise. There was one particular neighbor that had concern with the trees not covering the windows and folks being able to see into their home. So those are all things that as a Planning Commission, we have to take into consideration and allow the public an opportunity to bring their voice to us regarding any of these ideas, to make sure that we're thoughtfully considering all the impacts to an area where any of these things may go. So I like the idea of it coming to Planning Commission, and maybe it can go to the subcommittee for review to make sure it's all the criteria are met, and then Planning Commission to approve any of these projects before they can actually go live. So those would be the thoughts that I have for this component of it. Thank you.
Through the chair, just to provide a little more information to the commission, anything that operates in the city's right of way, sidewalk or street has to obtain an encroachment permit from the city. So even if it went through the CUP process, it would still have to obtain an encroachment permit from the Public Works Department. And our encroachment permit process, and this is established in the municipal code, requires insurance of $2 million minimum, and requires that people indemnify the city for any liability that arises out of that. So any of these permanent structures going forward, unless the council decide to change that, would be required to get that same level of insurance and that same indemnification.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I was just going to mention that.
Thank you.
Permit, especially in the right of way, especially the parkway, in the right of way would definitely require an encroachment.
Okay, great. Commissioner Curran?
Thank you. I think we're all kind of in agreement that there's a bifurcation between the dining areas and the parklets as far as the permit process goes. And I agree with everyone who thinks that there should be a more straightforward process for the dining areas as opposed to the parklets. I think that the dining areas should go through a hearing process for the simple reason. I think that, was it Frankie or Adam that was bringing this up about the fact that, that there could be an impact on neighbors, and we need to allow people within 300 feet the opportunity to comment on a change that might impact us. For that, so for that reason, I think that when we're looking at the dining areas or sidewalk, I think we're looking at the hearing process just to make sure that people within 300 feet have an opportunity to know about what's going on and also to comment. And I think that for parklets, I'm kind of think there should be a hearing process with a recommendation to the city council, because we are giving away city property when we're establishing the parklets. And I think that there's got to be some compensation. What's it cost? About $60,000. Tim, you're pretty much up on it. So about $60,000 for a parking space is kind of the going rate.
He's not here.
Oh, he's not here?
Yeah.
Okay, I think there is. I think there should be some compensation and some annual fees to compensate the city for the loss of these parking spots with inspections. And so I think it's something that if there is if we are giving away city property to an owner, a private entity, that should be approved by the city council. But there's also issues as far as who owns that. And I've kind of brought this up before. If we have a parklet there and it's on city property, and I think that David, Hannah, you were talking about how they could be used for people who just want to sit and read or whatever. I mean, what if what if people who are not diners want to go sit in those areas? Will the person who's leasing out that area have the right to exclude them from that? Could we see homeless people that are sleeping at night? We don't see that now, but it is a private area. I mean, it is a public area, and I'm not sure exactly whether we can restrict private, ordinary citizens from utilizing city property to the benefit of somebody else. So for that reason, I think I think we need to include something about not just the maintenance, but kind of what if we are renting out that space, kind of what it means to the person who's renting it out. What control do they have over deciding who can utilize that space, as opposed to it's open to the general public. So I think we need to address that. So in summary, I think that we need to go into hearing process for ordinary, for outdoor dining permits, just to give the people around it an opportunity to put in their thoughts. And I think we have to go to a hearing process where the city council approves anything where we're talking about parklets.
I'm gonna ask a question. Would it be for the lesser of the two? Are you talking about just doing like a zoning administrator hearing? I mean, because that's similar to.
Yeah, as the zoning administrator, the second thing there,
Yeah.
with the right to appeal to the planning commission.
Right, okay. I just want to make sure so when he's talking about the administrative or the hearing process, he's talking about using the zoning administrator.
Yes, exactly. Make it as simple as possible, but yet making sure that people that may be impacted have a notice and the right to make comments.
Okay, so if we were looking at these, we've got the 4 examples here. If we were to go through a hearing process. So I think what I heard is that regardless of the level, be it a private or, do we think that a private actually does need to go through a hearing process? Or can it just be approved by the planning manager?
I think anything has to go through a hearing process because even if there's somebody that's in like in a shopping center or something like that, there could be some objections by the neighbors of that property as to the encroachment into parking spaces or or taking up too much space on the sidewalk, whatever. So I think
Okay, fair enough. So we're looking at least the level of the second that what we have here, a hearing process through the zoning administrator with the appeal rights to the planning commission for the private. Correct?
yes.
Our line right there.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So you got that? Okay, and then we move up to the sidewalk one. I think Commissioner Menez brought up some good points. That do we want to leave it at that same level, or do we think that is that the planning commission needs to rule on that?
To me, it feels conceptually the same as the former, where it's, we should have a hearing about that, but I don't know if it needs to come all the way up to us for the sidewalk one.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, the main thing is to get the people to an opportunity to comment. And if they feel like they want to appeal to the planning commission, they can do that.
So long as we have the standards in place.
Yeah.
Okay, and
Before we
Go ahead.
move on to parklets, I think I'd like to note that the sidewalks by their nature are going to have a sort of universe of people who are involved with them, who use them. That's broader than the traditional notice area for the outdoor dining areas, because people are just going to be passing through or just using the sidewalk in general. It impacts a broader group of people that may not necessarily be informed about zoning administrator hearing process, where they might be able to be informed about planning commission hearing process. And I also have a question to David Hanham. What's the cost difference to the applicant in terms of hearing before you versus hearing before the planning commission? Is there any?
It's a huge, well, if it's coming here, it's usually a conditional use permit at that point. So from the way our zoning ordinance is set up right now, administrative use permits, at least at this point, don't come to the commission. They go through staff or the zoning administrator. So conditional use permit process that we're processing right now is about $7,300. Whereas in the zoning administrator hearing is probably in the neighborhood of about 1,500, 1,600. It's mainly for the public notice, the hearing, and then in terms of staff preparation, it's a much smaller. Findings are a lot less to, the findings for zoning for those permits are a little less intensive in terms of staff review. So so yeah, there's a pretty big cost.
But it's
Just so I just pulled it up for reference, the administrative use permit is $875. The conditional use permit is $5,186.
But that doesn't include the public notice fee. That it's additionally, because we'd have to send a public notice out, which is approximately 700. And then the actual hearing itself, which is about 500 now, I think it was 449, but I'm not sure what it is now. So those costs are added to the conditional use permit and to the administrative, but there's a big difference in terms of
Okay.
cost.
so seeing as we're talking about, effectively speaking, designing a new kind of permit here, it's not necessarily the case that it would match up either with the administrative use permit cost or the conditional use permit cost. I think the relevant values there are the public notice and holding the meeting costs, and that sounded like it was about $1,200 in total for the planning commission. How much of that cost would be the case for the zoning administrator if it was needed to be a noticed hearing?
Well, it'd be an administrative use permit at that point, so it would be $800.
Right, but you also said there were additional costs apart.
Oh,
from-
it would be 800 plus the 700 for the public notice and the 449 for the hearing. So that's 2,000, 1,500, 1,900. I mean, I'm doing math on the thing. It's approximately 1,900.
Right, so the point I was trying to get to there was the additional costs for a public hearing as opposed to type of permit are the same, whether it's before the planning manager, zoning administrator, or before the planning commission, because it's essentially a fixed cost thing. So I'm not necessarily sure about considering it as conditional use permit versus administrative use permit is helpful, because we're sort of trying to design a different sort of thing. I think that if we want to have public input, that's going to impose a cost of about $1,200 on the applicant per application, regardless of whether it's before the planning manager or before the planning commission. So that was sort of the data point I wanted to have available to the commission and the public in general, just the bureaucratic cost we'd be imposing on applicants. And I still think that, given that the cost would be the same for the additional hearing cost as such, as opposed to the type of permit cost, would be the same for hearing before zoning administrator or hearing before planning commission, but it would still be beneficial to have the sidewalk level projects come before the planning commission because it impacts a broader swath of the community than the outdoor dining areas do in a similar way to what parklets do, although to a less extreme degree.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm thinking about that, but I think if we have that we're very clear as far as what the specifications can be for a sidewalk. The kind of person you're talking about is not one who's being affected permanently by having outdoor dining. It's a pass-through person. So if we're following what, as far as the making sure that there's space for people to be walking, there's space for wheelchairs, there's space for all of that kind of stuff that can be determined and ministerially just as well as it can be determined in front of the planning commission. So I think the people that we're most concerned about in these kinds of things that they, as far as public comment, are the ones who live there or who are affected by it or have their business right next door. So I would personally, I hear what you're saying, and I think it's important for that, but I think we can design the actual wording so that there's no, so that pass-through people are, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, they're not impacted to the same degree.
Yeah, they're
I
not
mean-
impacted to that same degree.
If they're passing by that often, they're gonna see the notice, I guess, that there's a hearing, but they don't necessarily need, you don't need to limit just that process for people that are just, come by every now and then. It
Yeah.
seems excessive.
The
Yeah,
city, sorry, through the chair, the city also has standards. We could find them out from the public works director, but like, you're not, I don't know if it's 4 feet or 6 feet or what it is, like, you're not gonna get smaller than it. The sidewalk's not gonna be narrowed to a foot, like you can, I think, in this, what is it, Bear Claw? And that's, it has those 2 extremely narrow tables that are outside of it, right? Like, they're not allowed to have 4-person seat tables. They're only allowed to have 1, like those little things. So there are a lot of the sidewalks in the city, where you don't have space for any seating, or you only have little seating. And that's something that's already through, if someone wants to put up a sign, or they want to do any of that, like those, that's already evaluated by the public works director as part of an encroachment permit process to ensure that there's still a right of way, ADA accessible either way for 2 people traveling in opposite directions on the sidewalk.
So I would be in favor of keeping the private and the sidewalk at the same level. The ministerial then with appeal rights to the planning commission, right?
So you're still looking at
The
a
second
hearing,
one.
but it'd be the zoning
Yeah.
administrator.
Yeah, that it would be hearing through the zoning administrator with appeal to the planning commission. And then with the parklet, I think I agree with Commissioner Current that there are probably a few enough of them that it go to, I think you said with a recommendation to the city council, right? That you were saying or not, because I know that Commissioner Menes was saying, well, we don't need to bring it all the way to the city council. So I'm not quite sure.
No, yeah, I'd agree. Commissioner Curran brought up a good point that there's more than just the design aspects. There's actually financial aspects that the city should be aware of prior to us signing off on it. So I do agree with Commissioner Curran that it should be for the park. It should go, planning commission should look at it from a design standpoint, but then we make a recommendation
A
to the city.
recommendation to the city
So
council.
they can absorb, look at the other impacts for liability insurance, costs, et cetera, from their end.
So do you guys think, Commissioner Martinez and Current, and come back to Menes?
Well, I think Anna said said what I would have said.
Okay,
Exactly, and I would agree with that 100%.
okay.
Those impacts, I'm sorry, Chair, those impacts, what none of us know is there may be a capital improvement plan or something that we have no idea is going on, new fiber optics underground or something. And if we go and approve something saying, oh yeah, put your parklet there. And then 2 weeks later, there's this other project that we don't have any visibility into and haven't shared with city council, that could create a problem. So I think this is a very good idea that we present anything that's those parklets impacting that infrastructure, that we at least give city council an opportunity to look at what we've reviewed, please. Thank you.
So I'd first like to thank Assistant City Attorney Mogg for bringing up the point of the encroachment permits and the way that it already includes ADA and liability and other concerns. I know that you mentioned it earlier, but mentioning it in this particular context in terms of how we're doing permitting is helpful, because I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that would at least partially include is there going to be a conflict with city uses then when it goes through the whole encroachment permitting process?
Yeah, I mean, they would be required, I mean, we would require that with the park, that we would require that they enter into an encroachment permit. So that would be an automatic condition that would already be on, which would be associated with the project. So because they would be going into the public right of way. So all of that would be worked out between the applicant and the city at that point.
That said, I do agree that my fellow commissioners have made various good points that ultimately a lot of this stuff could very well rise to a level where the city council would in fact want to engage with it. So I'll agree that this probably should rise to the 4th level of planning commission makes a recommendation to the city council rather than making a final decision, even though that's probably going to escalate costs to everybody involved further. I do see the point that's made as part of the consensus, and I agree with the consensus.
Okay. Then I think as part of that, I'm gonna suggest that we move to the next bullet.
Well,
But
I'd like to make one quick comment about Raphael's concern about cost. Remember that if we have parklets, these people, the people who are making this application are getting a very valuable piece of property. They're getting a couple hundred square feet of extra space. And paying $7,500 or $900 for that is a bargain.
That's a good point. Yeah. Helping
yeah,
real estate.
excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Current.
Oh.
But I'd also like to make sure that we add into these thoughts that we have not, and I don't think we want to discuss it right now, one-time and annual fees, maintenance and liability. The maintenance and liability has got to come in there, and part of that will be part of the encroachment permit. But inspections, we need to look more into that because that's staff time, but very, very important. So it doesn't start looking like, whatever. But one-time and annual fees, I think that's up for discussion. Maintenance and liability, what are our standards that should go into the actual writing?
This actually just occurred to me. Is more of a question for David Hannum. For some of the parklets where you have some of the pictures that look like they actually have like more permanent structures, whether it's a roof or a post or permanent electrical,
Right.
would that actually still go through building department, or is that kind of outside of this, or how does that?
No, I mean, they would have to get a building permit. They'd still have to get, I mean, in most cases, anything over 120 square feet would require a building permit. So if they were to construct a parklet, and let's just say, for example, they use the size of a parking stall, that's 180 square feet. So that would require them to use a building permit.
Okay, so anything that had permanent electrical, any of this kind of stuff that would still require building permit outside of this whole process to begin with?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is just our permitting process. This isn't, and so, yeah, maybe I should make that a little more clear. This is just how, when these applications come into the city, how are we going to process them? Are we going to process them as the consensus is right now? We're looking at the outdoor dining permit for the
Private
sidewalk, the sidewalk
and the private.
and the private as a zoning administrator permit. And we're looking at the parklets as a planning commission permit recommendation to the city council.
Yes.
So all the conditions of approval and the review would go into that, so that when it came to the planning commission for review, you would see all those conditions. They have to get a building permit.
Okay.
The electrical, they need, all of those.
I think it's important to note also that when we were talking about the permitting process for the first two categories, sidewalk and private property, that was the second order one, hearing process through the zoning administrator, not the first order administrative permit process. Just want to be clear on that.
Yes.
I mean, zoning administrator is kind of like a ministerial process, but it is a hearing process. So it's just the least of the hearing processes.
Okay. All right. So does that give you enough?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, Madam Chair.
All right, then, so, the next one on locations. Describe the locations and or zoning districts where different categories of outdoor dining are allowed through the permitting process. Did we have a slide on that?
Oh, I think we did.
Yeah, I kind of like make short work on this. I don't see any reason to limit. I think it should be throughout
Oh,
citywide.
there we go. So basically using the different locations, I didn't have a map because the CMU and the RMU pretty much represent most of the San Pablo corridor, as well as the Appian Way corridor with some mixed in office OPMU and OIMU. I didn't include those. However, if you want to include those in all of the zoning districts within the specific plan corridors, you can, except for the residential. That's the way it is right now. You would have the permit process in terms of whether it's the zoning administrator or city, planning commission into the city council. So you've done that. And then using the regional commercial areas and that are not within the specific plan area. So if there are different areas that outside the specific plan area that you would like to be able to be allowed to do outdoor dining, and that could be used as well. If you just want to say, look, we'll just use the 3 corridor specific plan and dictate that, we can use that area and bring that back. And we would announce to the council, we would bring to the council that basically the planning commission has recommended that basically using the specific plan, specific zoning uses, CMU, RMU, OIMU, which is office industrial mixed use, or OMPU, office professional mixed use. In those areas, you can include those as well. Or if not, or if you just want them, like we just want them in the CM, we just want parklets in the CMU area, that's it. Or, you have that ability to do that. Currently, all outdoor dining is allowed in all the districts except for residential.
Residential. So
Yeah, so
what I heard, let's just go with what Commissioner Current said. He says no limits. We can address it. Is there anyone who disagrees with that?
No, I don't. It's fine.
I think that's a great idea as well.
Okay.
Yeah, the only question I have is that,
I'm sorry, hang on, Mr. Current. Go ahead, Mr. Menace.
I think that generally speaking, it's fine to have it be citywide. I think that, if we're gonna say that it's okay to have these citywide, that'd be important that we explicitly note that we're not just saying we want it to be within certain specific plan areas, but that we want it to basically be extended out from the current zoning where it's allowed basically anywhere outside residential in all the areas. So Fitzgerald, anywhere that's basically not marked residential.
right.
Because it sounds like the default presentation was it would be allowed within certain specific plan areas. And it sounds like what the consensus is sort of inclining to is more broad than that.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, the regional commercial areas have more of the private outdoor dining areas, or where the parklets, if you wanted more of the parklets downtown, you could do that as well and not have parklets. There's really not other places besides the downtown where parklets would be on that. So you can determine that in the old town, that only this whole outdoor dining experience only, for parklets is downtown. The rest of the areas can have the different areas.
So
Different
what I think what we're saying is that we're kind of headed towards a citywide, except residential, except, Mr. Current, you did have a comment.
yeah, I always like to look for the outliers, and that is like, hey, could I, being a homeowner, decide to have a parklet in front of my house?
That's where we say no residential.
Yeah.
I think we have to kind of somewhere restrict, the applicants to have a commercial business. Somewhere in language, we shouldn't say that this only applies to commercial establishments.
I think it should be zoned for commercial because someone could be running a business out of their house with a commercial license, right?
Not even zoned. I think that the applicant has to have a bona fide business, reason to have a dining area or parklet or
Well,
whatever.
but if someone's running a daycare out of their house. It's out zoned for residential, but they got a commercial
Yeah.
And that's
well, I-
license.
You can have it specify it's only for
Eating establishments.
food eating establishment.
Yeah, I think there should be some language that, because there's gonna be somebody who's gonna find a loophole and, I think we have to make sure that we really limit to who the applicants to be.
Well-
I'll let you figure that one, Alex.
Yeah,
Okay,
then. This is Commissioner Martinez. I guess if I can just add to Commissioner Curran's comments. There might be folks that are making cookies out of their house, and to the point is if we don't specifically say this is not for residential areas, someone may decide that they want to set that parklet up because they happen to live on tenant and they're making cookies out of their house. So I think that's where we should be very clear that if this is going to be available, it would be for commercial establishments, but not in any of the residential areas.
Okay, I mean, I would recommend that you pick zone districts actually. Because with residential mixed use, you could have a commercial establishment on the bottom with residential on top. 49% of it being commercial on the bottom, or restaurant, and then those people live on top, i.e. Blackies. Blackies is zoned RMU. On the corner of Park and Tenant. So I think that I would recommend that you look at our zone districts, that we look at our zone districts and allow those, or allow them in our zone districts instead of just blanket citywide. We have the zoning in place. We have the zoning regs in place. We have all the development standards. We have the permitted and non-permitted uses all within those zone districts set up, both as in specific plan as well as the zoning ordinance. So I would recommend that you select zoning ordinances or zone districts so that we can.
So what would the zoning districts then be that would basically, you hear where we're headed, right?
Yeah.
So what would be the zoning districts that would accomplish that same purpose? So, I mean, seriously, listing them down.
No, I am, CMU, RMU. The only other commercial zone district is regional commercial I don't think you're gonna want a parklet on Fitzgerald.
What about industrial mixed use?
Industrial mixed use is office industrial mixed use. If the use is incidental in support of the, i.e. La Familia,
Yeah, that's the one
okay.
I'm thinking of.
yeah, I mean, they would be allowed to do outdoor or, and it's because it's allowed in that zone district, but their use is restricted based already on the zone district. Because
So,
they're in support of that.
I think what I'm going to suggest is you know the spirit of what we're headed towards.
Yeah.
So if you could make that fit what we're,
So restaurants are defined use in the code, and they're allowed or they're not allowed already in the code. And so we could simply tie it to, you must be a restaurant operating, and restaurants aren't allowed in, purely residential establishment districts.
okay. And so I can't remember who had already mentioned it being eating establishments.
The only concern I have with limiting to just restaurants is if, for example, with the parklets, if some business wanted to do something that wasn't an eating establishment, but wanted to develop a parklet for art purposes or something else, make use of that. Yeah, that we'd be limiting it to just outdoor dining. And I think at one point, presentation, they're talking about, art installations, just general public space for.
It seems to me that that would go through a different process. I mean, these seem to be aimed towards eating establishments. Unless you want to broaden it, and then that's kind of another kettle of fish.
Mm.
Mr. Menace?
So I think there's a few different things here. I think that Commissioner Benzouli's point about there potentially being non-food based uses for parklets in particular, especially given that we do have some artistic businesses in the Old Town Pinole district, is worth considering. And I think because I know a lot of this stuff is structured around outdoor dining, but I know that one of the bullet points that we're going to be talking about later is consider encouraging other elements such as public art. So I think that does tie into sort of our area of discussion here. I think it might be worth considering in Hannah's suggestion to confine parklets to the Old Town sub area in particular, rather than having them be citywide, to potentially address some of the risks of encroachment, and because the primary traffic calming benefits would be in the Old Town sub area in particular. And that's a reasonably broad area, if I'm recalling it correctly. Though it's not as broad as the historic district that the council tried and failed to establish.
Raphael, I kind of disagree, because if I were a business owner, like say Rip It golf store, I mean, taking up parking spaces and putting up the parklets is a very cheap way of expanding your business. And I could just see every business saying, hey, I want to have a parklet and I'm going to put my stuff out there. And then we don't have any parking spaces. So I think we need to be very restrictive on who we're allowing to have parklets, or else there will not be any parking spots in on the street.
And let me, there's also requirements regarding outdoor storage, outdoor merchandising. So there's a whole selection for businesses that aren't restaurants, but they are retailers. There's a whole list in the zoning code of what procedures they would need for those types of uses. So that's why this is primarily for restaurants and eating establishments. And that's kind of where this is all been headed. So, and regarding the art, when we get to that section, it's more of the art on the parklet than in the parklet. I mean, not to say that someone couldn't put some paintings or stuff in their eating establishment. A lot of it is more of the on the parklet itself.
Okay, you all right with that? Okay, so what I'm hearing then is a consensus is that we link these to current eating establishments, the restaurant establishments, and citywide, except where there are actual commercial restaurant establishments. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right, then let's move on. This next one, to establish standards for design and materials, size, landscaping, accessibility. I think we just have to say, yeah, do it. I mean, we're not gonna make those.
Dave, can you go to that slide just to show the, okay, that's not that one. Go back, I think. There we go. Okay, next one. Go forward. Sorry. Right there, stop. Okay. So basically I've included some of the areas, some of the things that are used in terms of heavyweight barriers and lightweight barriers. I guess the question is that in terms of when designing these and looking at establishing standards, that we are able to use all of these as part of the design concepts in terms of using heavyweight barriers depending on where it is, and lightweight barriers in those. Is that kind of what I'm hearing, instead of actually specifically, like we want cement barriers on, we definitely want cement barriers along San Pablo. There are some, see if I can go to, Dave, if we can look at some of the pictures of the parklets. Okay, yeah, okay, so in that case, it's a one-way street, it's fairly, but you have the bikes in front of the parklet, but there is that metal pole at the end. So, go forward a little bit, Dave. Keep going. Okay, so we've got some structures, for parklets. you know, over in-
I think we want to, I'm sorry, I'll speak and then y'all can, whatever here, but I'm looking at some of these different cities and we've got packets of designs and such. So it's not going to happen that we're going to come to any kind of consensus here and say, well, this kind of barrier versus this kind of barrier versus this kind of barrier. However, if we take, for example, the idea of something that looks very temporary, i.e. Sue's Place.
Right.
Versus something that looks more permanent.
Yeah.
That if we head that way, and not get into the weeds on that, except that we look at the examples of different cities that have very not elaborate, but well fleshed out things for ideas. If as far as, again, keeping those things as far as safety, and it being much more permanent versus temporary tent that you can't see. I don't know if, if there are some specific things that we would like to include right now, I think that would be a good idea. I'm thinking specifically of, visibility and such.
Or cover, like or if you allow for covers, i.e. not necessarily tents, but so structures can be as high as 8 feet high and they can cover, they can cover the parklet or cover the area with their, that kind of stuff. I think those types of, at least at this point, that could be discussed and agreed upon, or whether or not you don't want them to have covers. I'm gonna use this one right here where you have openings where you can see they've got kind of a cover over the top. So maybe we can define that in terms of the parklets. I mean, the design areas, the other ones are pretty simple. They're not going to be covered per se. They'll be out in the open. So, but the parklets could have potential of being covered. So I think maybe we want to add, can they be covered? You want them to be covered? If so, how, maybe a little height, maybe,
Well, I think something that's really important is something that Frankie brought up, and that's visibility. I'm looking at this picture here and looking at that car that's parked in front there. When it pulls out, it's not going to be able to see if there's any cars coming, which is an accident ready to happen. So I think that safety, whether it's concrete barrier or what are those called bollards or bollards? Bollards. Something like that, something that would protect the diners from an errant car, and also visibility so that someone pulling out of a parking area would be able to see whether it's safe or not. So I think, I think there has to be either plexiglass there or opening or something like that, but there has to be visibility has to be a consideration.
Mr. Menace?
So I think there's a few things that I want to bring up with regards to design. I think that first up, and Attorney Bog can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like a lot of the nitty-gritty details around design and materials are the sort of thing that would naturally come before the design review subcommittee, and that they could sort of hash out sort of like, this is the kind of bollard we want to use. This is the way. I know that we already started discussing it a bit at the one subcommittee meeting we had on parklets a few months back. So it seems like that would sort of be the natural place to go into detail and then bring that back to the planning commission if we want to have a formal vote on that. And then there's one or two things that I think are worth considering now, though. First off, I do think that being able to have the parklets be covered would be a good idea, because as we've just witnessed over these past couple of months, we do have rain, sometimes quite a bit of it. And if you've got an outdoor space that you can't protect from rain, it's going to be a much less comfortable dining experience. with regards to heating, I'm wondering whether we can mandate the use of electric heating and bar the use of natural gas or propane, because there have been studies recently showing the negative health impacts of burning those things in close proximity to, people breathing.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, if, you would design the outlet, you would design the parklet to include some electrical, they'd just be able to go and plug it in and, and make sure all the currents are all that. So yeah, that's as we get more into the weeds, yeah, those are issues that we would be covering.
I just wasn't sure whether that was the sort of constraint that could go in at the permitting process level, or whether that would require legislation from the council to be able to implement.
I mean, we could, go ahead.
Something like that, I would suggest it should be coming from the city council, not a project by project determination. It's not really a design feature. That's something the planning commission should be deciding. That's a larger scale topic.
Sure. So I guess I would say then, in terms of our recommendations to the city council, in order to make parklets more in conformance with the sustainability element of the general plan, I would encourage, and I would hope ultimately the consensus of the commission would be to encourage the council to bar the use of fossil fuel burning heating elements and to require the use of electrical heating elements to improve both the sustainability element and also the health and safety element of the general plan. And those are my comments with regards to design. I agree with the importance of safety, making sure that we've got appropriately sturdy barriers and visibility, as Vice Chair Martinez noted.
Okay. See, Mr. Martinez, see your hand up.
Thank you. Let me take my hand down now. So where I'm at, yes, it does go back to visibility. So what we've seen in other cities is they allow that lower portion to be as tall as, but no taller than 36 inches. And then their requirement is that they can use plexiglass, acrylic, whatever they want, but those sides must be clearly visible. And oftentimes, some of the cities are saying from the floor of the parklet to the ceiling, some cities will say 6 foot, some will say 8 foot. It doesn't make a difference to me either which way, but we do want to set some at least minimum guidelines. So if they do want to put some type of a roof or some type of plastic or whatever they want to use in the winter, that we allow them that capability. Additionally, we do need to also cover things like fire retardant materials be used, because anytime we're using electricity or anything around that, we want to make sure that if, for example, they buy umbrellas, that those umbrellas are appropriately treated with the whatever fire retardant material they need to be, so as to not go up in flames, right? So those are a few of the things that I'm kind of working through on this when I think about the parklet designs. And yes, other cities have already mandated that any of the exterior walls, I think you call them the bowl outs or whatever they were, that they be at a minimum, each component weigh at least 250 pounds so that they're not easily knocked over.
Right.
So that's another nice standard that other cities have already said this is the standard we're going with. I think if we were to adopt some of the things that have already been done in the other cities, we'll be off to a pretty good start. And then the last thing that I'd like to see if we're working on this is any of these edges where the endpoints are, where they kind of come together on the street, that again, some of our requirements are that they're using appropriate reflective taping. So when it's nighttime and somebody's driving along, that reflective tape really defines where the end of that particular parklet corner is. So those are just some of the ideas that I wanted to put forward to the group. And yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Venzili.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely concur with Ann said earlier. I think about making it feel more of a permanent structure than a temporary thing. So I think limiting tents and guardrails and things like that, that have that kind of temporary look, you would minimize that or prohibit that. And everything has to have some sort of permanent feel. Whether it's the foundation, the structure itself. I'm kind of going back and forth on the whole roof for heating or no heating type thing. Part of me is thinking, yes, we should make them all have roofing and heating. And part of me is like, well, if a business owner decides, well, I don't want to invest in the cost of a roof or cost of heating, and they just want to keep it open, and then they're limiting their ability to serve customers during rainy seasons or when it gets cold out, then that could kind of be their direction. Or if they're like, no, I want to build this whole thing and make it watertight or, heated and everything, and they could do more. That could kind of be their impetus, I guess. We would just say that, like, if you're going to build whatever you're going to build, you need to meet code and flammability and all that other safety stuff. For any permanent structure you're going to put on. I wouldn't know if we want to limit what they do or don't from a roofing, heating. It just has, whatever they do has to be semi-permanent or permanent. I don't know how to necessarily quantify that, but
Well, basically what you're at, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're trying to say is that we have the standard. If they want to use it, they can. If they don't, then that's okay. For example, if business A comes in and they want to do a parklet, but they don't want to do a roof structure and they don't want to do that, there's still a certain base criteria that they're going to have to meet using heavyweight barriers, using, depending on what, the barriers that you select as part of the program. However, if business B comes in and says, you know what, I want to include a roof, or I want to include something like that we have a standard for that when it comes in, and they have the ability to build that standard. So that, and then it has to meet certain safety standards as well. It's got to be, it's got to meet all the building code stuff and all that. So I think you approve the standard that you want. You give them options. You can give the businesses options of what they want to do. But if depending on what options they have, then there are specific standards for those particular options.
yeah, I agree. I agree that I don't think we should set a minimum regardless. It should be flexible enough for the business to decide what they want, but then when they pick a path, there's some minimum standards they need to adhere to.
Okay. And I'm looking at the City of San Mateo Parklet Program guidelines. And I mean, for example, they have criteria that addresses drainage.
Mhm.
So platforms should allow for curbside drainage flow. Then they also have criteria for bolting. Bolting is not allowed. Those kinds of things. Maintenance access. Platforms must be constructed from durable materials that can withstand wear and tear of elements. Pouring concrete is not allowed. So there are some of these specific things that we're not going to hash out tonight, but I think, as was said before, by other people, is to look at some of the standards from some of the other cities that head towards what we're looking for, this permanent, semi-permanent kind of thing, not bolted, but safe,
Right.
and it's got wheel stops, it's got, traffic lane
So
clearance, et
basically
cetera.
what we want to recommend to the council is that you want to set up a standard, safety standard,
Safety
so-
visibility.
safety visibility standards. You want to have, you want to be able to review the lighting. You want these things to be more permanent in nature, not, like I said, we'll get down into the weeds of, yes, you're going to have the 250-pound barriers. If you're in, sections 5 through 7 or whatever, we'll get into that. But if you go, Dave, if you can go to that slide with the building materials or the safety guardrail stuff. For me, please.
So Dave, this is Frankie, just to chime in though, but to also make sure we include the component relative to fire safety materials or fire safe materials.
Right.
Because I'll be honest with you, a couple of times when I've been inside of the smaller tent enclosures and they
Yeah.
turn on propane tanks.
Yeah.
Woo, I've seen a couple of them burn through the top. I honestly have. So yeah, we want to address the fire component in there, please, if we could.
That's all part of the safety, that's all part of the safety aspect of it. So,
Okay, thank you.
Dave, can you go back a couple more? You're gonna have to, I think, go back. Stop right there. There you go. So basically what we're looking at is based on the picture we have right there, we've got all different criteria in terms of the heavier barriers, lightweight barriers. We want to recommend to the council that we want to include the more permanent for the parklets. We want to include more of the permanent heavyweight barriers. And that we, as part of and then include additional design features for visible vertical elements, i.e. the covers, the openings and the windows and that kind of stuff. Is that I want to make sure so that I can when I'm forwarding this to the
And
council.
then also to again, look at examples
Right.
in terms of like reflective corner elements.
Yeah.
Wheel stops.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole
shoot, man. Okay.
mhm. Wheelchair accommodations, accessibility, ADA, platform, drainage, et cetera. I mean, that's where that's.
Okay.
Yeah. Mr. Menace?
Right, and then I guess I'd like to share feedback from the rest of the commission on whether we want to recommend to the council as part of better implementing the health and safety element and sustainability element of the general plan.
Yeah.
Whether we want to suggest that the council require that any heating elements installed in these parklets in particular, but possibly also the outdoor eating areas as well be electrical in nature and not possible.
Sorry, I forgot that. Yeah. I think that's a reasonable thing, especially seeing what, how the council has been thinking about the sustainability elements and, I mean, we're not going to tell people what stove they can use, but maybe we can tell what burners they can use, at least to recommend it.
And I think you're just mostly talking about like propane
Heaters.
heaters, right? Though the temp, which would be fall into the nothing temporary, right? So if they had a heater,
No, because you could have I mean, it's one that you move in and out.
Right.
Right. So an electric one, you would probably move in and out as well, right?
Must be
Not necessarily.
well.
Necessarily. Okay. Yeah, maybe it would. But I think this is a more specific thing. And you might feel uncomfortable recommending it.
no,
Sure.
I'm just trying to keep the flexible a little bit, we're going on the flexible side, but I wasn't sure if you're just talking about purely, the rolling propane tanks, or if you're talking about any fossil fuels in general, even if it's a permanent piped, gas propane heater, saying, no, we're not gonna do that at all. Anything's gotta be electric regardless.
I think especially with regards to the health and safety considerations, that anything would need to be electric regardless, because if you're piping and stuff, then you've got, what if the pipe ruptures?
Well, it would still conform to the building code. I mean, it
Right.
have to be plumbed and installed and inspected by the plumbing and building code.
Right, but there's still the inherent risk of, burning fossil fuels in close proximity to where people are eating. Which
So I think maybe what we can do is draw it to the city council attention that this is a discussion that we're having and that we want them to consider using that and using the language that Commissioner Menace brought up as far as from the general plan.
Right.
So
You can do that.
Chair Moriarty?
Yeah.
I guess what I'd like to add is, I'm trying to be thoughtful here for the business owners. And that may be, thank you for your comments, Commissioner Menace, but let's also remember the market dynamics that we're dealing with. We've got an electricity provider that consistently has proven themselves to not be reliable. So if we're mandating that we're going to use that one supplier that has the monopoly and they're not reliable, it could prevent As an example, if we put that requirement in place for electricity, it's a cold evening and people want to have sandwiches at Sue's and she's still serving because electricity's out. Now she is unable to heat it warm enough for her guests, as an example, right? So I think that's probably an area that we should let the market determine. And let me give you an example as to why. I've looked at different environments of using the electric outdoor heaters, and the market cost on those things consistently run between $3,000 to $10,000. So there's a reason why the restaurateurs, business owners, are using the gas ones. It's because the cost of entry might be as little as $99, or if you get up to a really nice commercial one, it might be $600 or $700. So imagine you've got to buy 5 of those or 10 of them, right? There's a reason why they're using those propane ones, and it's because that they're just a lot less expensive to run, maintain, and overall cost of entry to provide that level of warmth for your business is a lot lower. So I really want to be careful, because if we start putting restrictions on the small businesses, which these are traditionally small business owners, that may be a restriction that they can't, it's too high of a bar of entry for them. So I just want to make sure that we hear their voice and we look at those numbers and the reasons why some people will invest in the electric and other ones won't. So I just wanted to share that with the group. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And actually this is a much deeper discussion in terms of ethics, in terms of where we're headed with our climate action plan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and balancing all those. I'm going to suggest that we not have that discussion now, but that we make sure that we bring it to city council, that we are recommending that they consider that. And in that consideration, they can think about small business owners and economics versus health and safety.
And not only that, but then if the council decides that they want to move forward with this program, then we'll be getting, using the ad hoc committee and using the other committee process and the public input of getting more in the specifics of what they can and can't use. So I think you're right. I think if we just stay a little general in nature, that we consider that point, at least at this point, that's where we're
At this point.
but we will be going deeper.
If this is about the electric versus gas, I'm going to ask that we table it right now.
It's just a brief comment with regards to the point-by-point nature of things, not necessarily electric versus gas as such.
Okay.
But something that I've noticed in terms of broader policy is when we had, because the council decided not to mandate citywide electrification in new building when that was brought up for their consideration back in, I want to say 2021. Or maybe it was early 2022. I know that it was something that came up implementing a reach code, and the council explicitly decided not to do that. And so as a result, when various projects came before us at the planning commission, and I and other commissioners asked, hey, can you voluntarily implement these reach code standards or this electrification? They're like, sorry, that's not practical for us. We're not required to do it. We're not going to do it. So if we're saying it could be resolved on a case-by-case basis, I'm not sure that I buy that argument, frankly.
No, and I think that's reasonable. And I think that the problem is that to have a blanket statement like that, we can recommend that the city council consider it, and we can't make that decision right here. But it is a bigger issue that does need to be considered and need to be considered fairly. And you're absolutely right. And it's great that you brought it up. And we also had, other commissioners thinking about, that the opposites of that. So I'd like to move that discussion to the city council level at a larger level. And we'll have another look at this before it comes through, before it goes to the city council for the final thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the city council could come back and say, yes, that's what we want,
Exactly.
So, I mean, so in this case, we're providing them options of what and how we start putting the policy together.
Okay, so let's just make sure that that does make it to the council. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, so let's move on to the next bullet. if we may. Consider encouraging other elements such as public art and bicycle parking. Is there anyone who is against?
Go to the next slide, Dave. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, there we go. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of I just use that as public art, but in some cities, what they allow for is on the parklets themselves, on the 3 foot, they allow for artwork to be, or murals to be put on to the walls of the parklet and those types of things. So, is that something that we want to encourage, or is that something that we want to have, or that's you want to have reviewed? And as well as bicycle parking. Right now, we don't have a whole lot of bicycle parking in the downtown right now. So, I mean, but that could lead to additional parking spaces being taken. So, and I think this one also has the public access component. So of what, limiting the hours, or is going to allowed to cut access to the outdoor dining areas, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the other part of this recommendation.
Okay, thoughts?
Yeah, I think we should definitely encourage the public art and the bicycle parking. Hours of operation, aren't there like night noise ordinances that we can say if you're doing stuff outside? They're somewhat limited
Yeah,
just by just general city disturbances and everything.
yeah, the city does have a
Yeah.
noise ordinance.
Yeah,
So, I mean, you could limit it to the use to those. However, in the summertime, usually a lot of eating establishments are open later in the evening, 10, 11, 12 o'clock, midnight, and if they have the ability to serve alcohol and all that kind of stuff. So, but if the commission warrants it, they could limit time for use of these outdoor areas.
Yeah, I think that some of that stuff is kind of case by case. So if all these things are going to go to a hearing anyways, depending on what they're planning on doing and where, we get brought up at the hearing and someone could limit it and say, you can't do this at that time or that time.
Yeah,
Case by case.
And I just want to make sure, though, these are two different bullet points that you have here that you.
Yeah, I lumped them together because they are two separate ones. I mean, one's considering encouraging the other elements, the other one is established.
So let's just keep them separate for
Okay.
just a second. And first of all, is anyone against encouraging other elements such as public art and bicycle parking? No. Okay, so let's say, yes, we will encourage that and wish for that. And bicycle parking, that's an interesting thought in another parking space, which becomes whatever. I don't know how that fits in with the parklet, but
Yeah.
now,
Madam
do you
Chair.
need anything else?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So with regards to encouraging, because I know there've been discussions with regards to public art with the ophthalmology center across from Sprouts at the corner there.
Mhm.
Does the city have any policies for public art yet?
Not that I'm aware of. So that could be something that we establish with this program for these particular items. So it wouldn't necessarily be for businesses on buildings or whatever, but this would just be for parklets or for outdoor dining. rooms.
And then with the language, encourage public art and bicycle parking. So does that mean that anything we put there would need to be strictly voluntary, or would we be allowed to put in stuff like incentives saying, like if you do X, you can have Y? Or would you be allowed to put in requirements saying there needs to be at least one piece of public art of X size?
Yeah, I don't think we want to require it. We should encourage it.
Yeah, I just wanted to know sort of what our range of options are here.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have the full range, actually. You could require a public art. I mean, actually, or you could say that you're encouraged, or the art needs to be of city nature or, Native American, you have that ability to regulate that. If you want to go that far, or leave it up to the set of certain standards of what you would like to see as public art on the parklets or in and around the parklet area, and then and go that route.
Yeah, I'm just not quite sure what encouraging public art means. It's sort of a concrete sense.
Yeah.
And I know that we're not going to be getting into the pretty details of just what exactly concretely it means right now, but
No, but I mean, I think for a general purpose, I think you would want, would you encourage public art such as allowing for painting on the parklets? Painting murals or painting certain things on the parklets, something of that nature. We can get down into it, but just a recommendation saying, yeah, we would encourage some art, along with the parklets, that kind of thing.
so it's more along the lines of allowing a broader range of expression.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
because we're not saying
Clear up.
you have to do something. We're not
No.
saying, no, you can't do anything. We're saying you can live in this non-extreme place.
Got it. Just
And,
wanted to
and-
clear
and we'll
that
set
up.
those standards, as we get further involved in developing guidance.
Exactly. This is Commissioner Martinez. I guess I'd like to add, for those of you that have been in Old Town on a Saturday morning, anytime from 8 a.m. till 2 in the afternoon, we have a lot of cyclists that come through Pinole. And we're really lucky because they always stop at Bear Claw for their carbs. So on the sidewalk in front of Bear Claw at any given time, you're going to see 3, 5, 10 cyclists, their bikes right there on the sidewalk. And it's because we haven't thought through this very issue of saying, should we take one of those slots and just earmark it for bicycle parking so that we're a little bit more friendly to those folks instead of making them park on the sidewalk and create that whole challenge of everybody trying to navigate to go get coffee and something from the Bear Claw because all the cyclists are there. And I love them. I love them being here. I like the business they bring to the community. I like the energy of having it, but it's this very issue that we need to address and find a way to thoughtfully create spaces for them that are safe. And yeah, somebody like Bear Claw, we went to them and, the business owner asked for a parklet and we were to say, okay, if we do a parklet, how about you kicking in the extra dollars to add one spot of parking for the cyclists that come and shop your business on a regular basis. I think if we were to look at it from different angles, we may be able to create solutions as we work through this process. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so that's all good. And let's move on now to establishing the standards that address the use of the area. And this now is getting to hours of use, public access, equity. Is the owner going to be allowed to cut access to the outdoor dining areas? That's what that says. And then you have a standard agreement with the city if it's in the public right of way. Okay, so standards that address the use of the area. So now please go ahead and repeat what you were saying before.
With the hours of operation, I think it probably should be case by case, depending on what they're proposing to do. Some people are going to do more breakfast or lunch service, some people are going to do more dinner. And if there's going to be a public hearing for this anyways, I would think that hearing would then say, okay, they're going to do this. And then they determine the hours of operation if it falls outside of a normal noise ordinance. And the cutting access to the outdoor dining areas, I can't say I've ever seen one that actually, you would obviously live without them pulling the furniture inside, making just kind of a blank space. I've never seen one that actually physically secures the space with like locks and walls. I've never actually seen that.
No, in some cases they use like ropes, just to kind of signalize that it's not being used right now. I've seen that. Yeah, I haven't seen like padlocks and stuff of that nature. It's more of kind of like a passive, cutting access of just,
So here's a statement from the county. It says the parklet sponsors shall keep the parklet free and open to all members of the public, regardless of whether or not they patronize any particular business. The parklet sponsor shall ensure that, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Yeah, they keep it all open, yeah.
Keep it open.
you know,
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think the last bullet point, the standard agreement with the city, yeah, we talked about that before, about ownership and maintenance and liability insurance, all that stuff. That would be part of that agreement, I would think.
Yeah.
right, Mr. Menace?
So I guess this sort of ties into Commissioner Curran's earlier comments on sort of, like who owns the parklet and like who controls access to it. Because if we're saying the public has universal right of access to the parklet at certain hours, at all the time, that we're also saying, that the city controls who can enter and leave it. And I know there've been Supreme Court decisions in other contexts saying that, the right of ejection is one of the fundamental property rights. So that I think would change some of the arguments we're having over fee structure and permitting process and so on and so forth. If we're saying that the city has the right to control access, we're saying that sort of, and I think this is primarily applying to the parklets and the sidewalk dining, and maybe not as much to the private dining spaces, because those are going to be, in the parking lots or within the physically controlled property.
Right.
It's sort of like, how are we balancing the loss of access of the public to the public right of way? Like, does that mean the public should just have full access regardless of the improvements that were made, or limited access, or no access outside of certain periods of time? So I think this is sort of one of the key questions that we actually need to resolve, or that the council ultimately needs to resolve one way or the other. Like, who are these spaces for? Who gets to use them, when and how, and for what purposes? Like, if a homeless person wants to go there and sleep there after the business is closed up, like, is it the business owner's responsibility to monitor that? Or to make it so that somebody can't physically go there? It's like hostile design and all those issues, which ties into issues of equity too, along with public access. Or is it simply going to be another space that's open to the community, which is going to create increased maintenance costs that would presumably fall on the property owner, and that would lead into other sort of permitting issues and so on. So I think this is probably one of the areas that we want to think about more carefully.
Well, like right now, with Bear Claw out there, they have their tables and chairs out there 24/7. They don't bring them in, they're secured out there. So anyone can go at any time during the day or night and sit down. If they
Yeah,
want.
but Sue's place it's closed.
Sue's closed off theirs.
Right.
So. So, yeah, well, Alex, I'm gonna probably lean on you for this one, in terms of, we could handle it in the standard agreement, right? In terms of access and all that kind of stuff, or is it just,
Yeah, we could either establish it there. The city council could just establish a policy for how they want it. They're in the city right of way, so the city can decide whatever condition they want as in exchange for the use of this property. No one who doesn't want to agree to it has to have one.
Right, and this is, again, thinking about, this isn't for the one that's on private property,
no, this is
Right.
more for parklets.
parklet and sidewalk as well, right? Because sidewalk is public right away.
The sidewalk and the other one, dining, didn't have the structure, the ability to necessarily cut it off, because it's
Yeah,
just
you're right,
seating
you're
and
right,
chairs,
you're
they're
right.
just placed.
Right.
Right,
So that's mainly for the parklet.
Maybe for the park, but I do think that depending on how permanent the sidewalk improvements are, but it might also apply there if they've got like chairs that are tied into the sidewalk somehow, depending on what our design standards are, that might apply.
Commissioner Current,
Well, I think that, Raphael kind of expressed what I've been saying all along, is that I think that, that if we're gonna be giving ownership or responsibilities to the property owner, that they should be able to control who uses them. I just fear, the fact that, you know, that people may, just go sit on these things when they're trying to serve meals. And if there's no way of saying, no, you can't be sitting there, I think that's going to create problems. So I think that, you know, if we're going to be giving this, you know, leasing this property to the restaurant, since we're talking mostly about restaurants here, they should be able to have control of who sits there.
Commissioner Martinez.
I appreciate Commissioner Kurt's comments, and I would agree with that. And it was brought up earlier about the maintenance of it and the upkeep of it. Well, if that business owner is paying for it, they should have the ability to restrict access. So I would be in agreement with that.
Are we talking about restricting access 24/7 at all times or just during business hours?
Well, the reality is if the business isn't open, they don't know about anybody being there.
Oh, that's true.
That's kind of where I was headed as well.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens after business hours is, I mean, they can't control that. I mean, it's true of any situation.
Well,
So
unless
maybe it's just during,
unless it's blocked, right?
yeah, but it's if people want to, you know, during normal business hours, they should probably have the right to say, yes, who comes in and out. But after that, if someone wants to sit there, just sit there. They probably should be able to just sit there. It's not impeding business operations at that point.
Okay. So you're saying that they can't close it and lock it off?
I think they should be allowed to do that if they want to. But I don't know if they'll actually go to that extreme.
Well, I think, again, Sue's place is closed off.
But that's a tent.
I know, but it's a tent, but.
But
it's an
Tina's, I don't
example.
think Tina's is. That's just always open, right? And
Matt?
Yeah, I mean, that's always, and all the ones I've ever seen are just kind of all open air. I mean, maybe they lock the chairs up, someone will steal the chairs, or
Right.
they have some control, but I don't think I've ever seen that many that are actually locking, even
I
the,
guess I'm trying to say, is there, I mean, do we, if we take the thing that this is the business's property in a sense now, or is being leased from the city or is being used from the city, then do they have the right to restrict access at all hours so that it doesn't get messed up inside or whatever it is? Or are we saying that when it's not the business, when the business isn't using it, that it has to remain open?
I could go either way on that. Like I said, I mean, if you know, if it's after hours and nobody's there, nobody, you know, no harm, no foul, you know, so to speak. But this kind of brings me back to a point: is if we are leasing the right of way to the businesses, then we should be looking at fees that are commensurate with square footage of rental, you know, and not just a freebie.
Attorney
So
Mung?
the city certainly can, one way or another, can decide whatever it wants for lease. It can say, it's up to you whether to restrict it. We could say you have to secure it at night. You know, you could say you can't secure it, and any time it has to be open to, you know, any member of the public. You know, the city could do any of those options because this is, you know, city property that someone is requesting to use. I would say, you know, I think, I forget who mentioned this, but like, this is a pretty major issue on this. So, yeah, you know, I suspect this is not something the city council would overlook in their consideration as to, you know, what to do about this. I'm sure it's something they will be thinking about it and deciding on as well.
And as we get into the process of designing of how this is gonna be, then you'll have the opportunity to take a look at it and whether, you know, we recommend based on, like I said, it's gonna have a public process, have the ad hoc committee process. So there could be, when it comes back to you, it may look totally different compared to what we thought about tonight and what the council thought about it prior to, you know, us really developing the guidelines. So based on what the public is looking at and based on what the ad hoc. So I think at this particular point, I would recommend that for the commission, if
That we punt.
yeah, well, it's kind of sort of.
Say, look, it's an
well,
issue and
that it's a major issue, that this is probably the major issue of this process. And that the planning commission wants to look at a lot of different ideas because they're really, I mean, like Alex saying, I mean, you guys tonight could say, you know, well, you know what, I think we want to restrict access. We want to restrict access from 10 a.m. to, or from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. We want to restrict access, or no, 24 hours, they're open, you know. So if there is something that you think that, you know, that you want to add, now would be at
So
least get
I
it.
think-
Get it
I
on the
think
books
what,
there.
I think what we want to add is the question of the rights of the public versus the rights of the business owner. And so that's the question that is at hand. So, and those are the things that we think the council really needs to consider. And we will look at that in more depth as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I want to add the thought that if it is public property and we're allowing the restaurant owner to have access to that public property, that there should be some kind of, payment for that. And not just a giveaway.
So I think that would fall more under the fee subsection. I think it would also be important to note for this item in particular that the planning commission was not able to reach consensus. Because I think that's relevant information for the council to have.
No, I
Yeah.
thought there was a kind of a consensus that the property owner should have control.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah, I just think that discussion is much deeper than that. I'm definitely not there.
All right.
So that's the one item that will, pretty much punt to the council at this point. But we will bring up the issues that you guys all brought up tonight so that they have
Yes.
they have the discussion of where the
Yes,
discussion went.
yes. Okay, excellent. All right, let's move on to addressing parking requirements. And could you, what do you mean when you say addressing parking requirements?
For example, if within the downtown area, the city did a parking study to outline, basically it's part of the commercial district of, how much parking is available for on-site, off-site, what's being used. And so, for example, if let's say Tina's wants to do a permanent one, she takes up 4 parking stalls. Are we going to require that they do a parking study or something that shows that there's still enough parking within the community, within the area, whether offsite or onsite through city lots and on-street parking throughout the commercial district, that's viable.
And even with private, like for instance, if you look at Mel's, for instance, which doesn't have it, their restaurant was supposed to have by zoning code so many parking spots, and I think that there needs to be a reanalysis if they're removing, say, like 4 or 5 parking spots, that they're still meeting the code requirements for parking.
Or whether or not that you would allow for a percentage of parking to be lost. So for example, that if a shop, let's say a center or a Mel's is required, 50 parking stalls, however, they want to do an outdoor dining, we can, based on, 10%, we know that, based on their stuff, that they could, by doing this process, that will allow them to reduce their parking by 10%.
That's kind of where I was headed as well. Not here, but determine some sort of maximum percentage before they have to take that next step of a parking study. Because I'd imagine a parking study is $50,000. They're not cheap, right?
Yeah, I mean, the city did an outdoor policy for its general, or we got a grant for it that outlined all the downtown parking, and we do one, I think, every 5 to 6 years. I think or at least we've had in the past 4 or 5 years, we've been doing one. So showing, all the on street, all the off street, and how many parking spaces are available for the general square footage of all the commercial and retail establishments within the area. So,
So this is mostly thinking, what I hear you saying is that this is mostly on the private, because if it's a street and you're taking away street parking, that's a different animal than it is taking parking out of a parking lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah, but also both should be considered.
Yeah, I agree. But the example that was given, I think is addressing specifically like a parking lot. If you were going to have your own little outdoor dining area in your own private area, and you reduce the parking by 50%, which totally affects the other businesses in your area, then that's not cool. But we also need to think about, you're right, and I think it's a separate thing if you're looking, for example, at the Bear Claw, which has got 2 parking spaces in front of it, and if they were to choose to use those 2 parking spaces to build a parklet there, is that a different
That's up there.
standard?
Well, and in most cases, all the way our parking code is set up, it's based off street parking. So if a business has, 200 square foot, or let's say 5,000 square feet, most of it that they have to provide 250 or 1 parking stall for every 250 square feet of gross floor area off street. So it's mainly going to affect those businesses that are in parking lots or in alleys, not so much of the off street. The only place that off street would come into play would be the downtown area, in which it's all incorporated. All of those spaces are incorporated within the square footage of within the square footage. And that's why over the years, the city has had ample parking for businesses within the downtown core, because it uses both off street and on street.
Yeah, this all gets back to my discussion that I've consistently saying, is that I don't think that parklet should be a giveaway. I think that there should be, it should be analyzed to what is the cost, per square foot or whatever. And if we make it to where the cost is market rates as opposed to nominal, we will find that establishments may not want to be doing this. In fact, I have a feeling that a lot of places that had parklets like Tina's or Mel's, for instance, it wasn't a good business model for them, because, Tina's got like 2 dining rooms. They don't really need to have a place in the back there. And I say the same thing as with Mel's. I think that they are pretty much designed for being inside. So we may not find that there's a lot of businesses that want to have these.
Right, because we don't have a dining area like, Menlo Park or something like that. So, Commissioner Martinez?
Thank you. See, I would venture to guess that we want to be really careful with those fees. We do not, as a city, want to be seen as not business friendly, right? Because when you look at San Francisco, San Mateo, Walnut Creek, they're not charging market rate for parklets at all. And if we, as a city, want to ensure that small businesses are moving to Pinole, maybe somebody wants to move back into Blackie's and start up a business, right? And they want to go back to the old Blackie's model of fried chicken, hamburgers, and hot dogs, right? But they want to, because remember, Blackie's never had any indoor seating, right? It was so small. If they said, okay, well, if our business model, if we can take a parklet, one of the parking spots out front or two of them and make something of it, we can make this business, we can make a go of it, right? But if we're the only city in the Bay Area that's charging market rate fees, those businesses won't come, folks. They just won't. So I get that one, makes me a little bit nervous, and I strongly say that we should stay away from that, because we don't want to set precedents that we're the only city that's doing this. But that's my thoughts. I'll let everybody opine in on their opinions.
Okay, let's keep focused on parking, that in particular at this point. But the question is if they're using a private lot that does affect other business owners, do we want to restrict the size of the parklet to begin with, right? Or that there be some give back for? I don't know if I'm addressing this in the right way.
Well,
I think
the parklets would be in the public right of way. So, the only place it would be, quote, losing parking spaces would be the areas within the park.
Okay,
within
so you're saying
the
if
private
this
outdoor
were-
dining
were-
areas.
so if we think about this just strictly as a parklet, which is in the street.
Right.
Okay.
So the private outdoor dining areas and the sidewalk dining areas are usually the private outdoor dining areas, as we've shown, are usually pushed out into the parking lot, adjacent to the business, similar to what Tina's is doing. That's more of a private outdoor dining area. It would be those types of businesses that would do that would affect an on-street parking requirement for the additional businesses. Because right now, the streets are fair game. Anyone can park in the street, right? So these businesses aren't really affected by the on-street, okay, on-street parking. They're more affected by the off-street parking. So I think because that's the way we've regulated in the past, right? So, with shopping centers, there's a gross amount of square footage, gross amount of parking. Now some guy's taking 7 parking stalls in the center. Now it affects a couple businesses, but yet it's only 3% of all the parking. He's illustrated that the parking lot's never more than 80% full at the highest date of the market, and I can just do that on an easy calculation day. So yeah, so I mean that's where it would be affected in terms of that. And regarding address the parking requirements, is that how do you want to address those? I mean, do you want us to? Are we going to be able to govern by percentage, or are we going to be able to do it by the code? Or
I guess and this goes to Commissioner Curran's point that it doesn't necessarily need to be a giveaway. If they are affecting the amount of parking that is available and it affects other businesses, then that needs to be addressed in some way. If it affects the on-street parking that is available for consumers in other businesses. but I'm not sure how to do that. So,
So it sounds like a lot of what we're talking about with regards to parking is not necessarily about parklets as much, so that is part of it, but the outdoor dining areas that are on private property and the sort of externalities that are generated by removing those parking spaces and sort of shifting the people that would have parked there onto sort of the public commons pool of parking spaces, as it were. So I guess this is a question to Attorney Mogg, again, to what extent can the city sort of regulate for those externalities? Like, are we allowed to say, because your conditional use permit was conditioned on having X numbers of private parking spaces and you're getting rid of some of those parking spaces, that impacts the conditional use permit? Or is it just, it's their private property and we can't do anything about it?
We can do, we can regulate, they have a use permit, if they have a use permit or whatever that requires a certain number of parking spots. If they're gonna go below that amount, that's subject to the discretion of the city of whether or not to allow that. So we could say you can never go below the minimum that's required. So you can only have one of these if, you put in extra parking. We could say, we'll allow you to take away 2 parking spots no matter what, but otherwise you have to stay with, meet the standard. We could say, you can reduce your parking by, 20%, however many spaces that is, but no more. So it's up to the city as to what the policy would be.
Right. And it sounds like you just said, policy. So I suspect a lot of this is ultimately going to be a decision the council is going to need to make, because it is ultimately a policy level decision of, how do we want the city to be structured? Do we want to prioritize people or do we want to prioritize cars? And how do we want to weigh the different values of those, the externalities of public versus private use? The nature of the commons, all that stuff, and that sort of goes beyond, I think, what we can really do at the planning commission level. And correct me if I'm wrong there.
I mean, that is certainly a topic for the planning commission. Parking is inherent the planning function. So if you have a recommendation on that, that's very directly involved with what the planning commission's role is.
Okay, because usually when it starts to become matters of policy, that's when we're supposed to stop touching it.
No, I mean, on planning issues, it's always something, planning and zoning standards, right? You make recommendations about the zoning code and those sorts of things are directly related to the planning commission's purpose and function. So if you have a recommendation as to how a parking standard should apply, that's certainly within, the city council adopts all policies, but, it's within the planning commission's role to make a recommendation on that.
Okay, but I wanted to make sure that was clear, because sometimes in the past I've, made suggestions. You're like, no, let's go.
Well, so like, to talk about what we were talking about earlier about heating, the sort of heating, that's not a planning function, right? That's not with something that'd be within the zoning code, right? That's a building code type thing. So that, in that situation, right, it is sort of outside the planning commission's jurisdiction. Parking is solely within, is definitely within that, just like a use type, what uses are we going to allow, what setback, what the height, what are the design standards, that parking is certainly part of that.
Okay.
Well, parking is part of the code. I think that if they're going to remove parking spots, they should still, they should still prove that they can live up to the code that concerns parking, required parking.
okay, unfortunately, I think we're kind of burning out a little bit here. I'm not sure that we're gonna take Attorney Mogg's direction and be able to make a recommendation at this point.
Well, can the planning commission make a recommendation that that we'll be taking a look at parking requirements as part of the overall design standards?
Absolutely. That we
Yes.
can do. That we can do, and that we want to, I believe we also want to think that whenever it is, if it's an outdoor dining that is on private area, that is looked at separately from a parklet that is taking up
Right.
public right of way parking, but how that affects, I mean, do we go back to the code? Do we, however that works, so. Yeah. Sorry, I mean but I feel like that's a real specific thing that needs more time than 10 o'clock at night. And not having the numbers.
Well, yeah, I mean, until you have actual projects and we actually get down into the weeds about, how many parking spaces should be required, or can we eliminate some parking in different areas? We need additional studies to show that, and we do have those. It's just I don't have it here tonight. But if we can say to the council that parking requirements need to be reviewed, they need to be, looked at as part of this process, then I think that at this point that we can move forward in that, because you do regulate parking as part of your conditional use permits, your design reviews. I mean, we have the code that stipulates, but you ultimately require, you also decide whether or not you can have reduced parking or shared parking or those types of things. So you do have a lot of discretionary decision-making regarding parking.
And perhaps to move this to the subcommittee as, being able to spend some time or, together with staff.
Right.
Looking at that. Okay. All right, let's move to the last one, address the transition from temporary outdoor dining areas to permanent dining areas. And we are looking at just the 3.
As of now, yes, we only have 3 that are still there: Sue's, Pear Street, and Tina's. So.
Well, the outdoor areas are most attractive during the summertime. So if we were to say October 1st, it probably would be a natural time.
I'm sorry?
October
Is that-
1st.
I mean, the eating outdoors is most pleasant when it's warm outside, which
Oh,
means.
no, no, the intention is that Tina's, Sue's, and Pear Street Bistro have temporary use permits. So for them to transition from a temporary use permit to the type of permitting that we're talking about now, how do we want to do that? Not the seasonal.
Well, what I'm saying is that there's a natural time consideration. So if we say October 1st, they can hopefully, get a permanent use permit, conditional use permit if they want.
All right, fair enough. Got it. I understand. So basically what you're saying is put a limit on the time that they have in order to make that transition.
Well, yeah, I mean, or what you could do is like what we have up there, either working with them to address new design program, is if we don't have that, or a full amnesty program for existing businesses. So that you can, because the emergency order from the city has been lifted, we can suspend their temporary use permits. However, if these businesses want to maintain this, or they want to continue to use this, and they want to come in, how are they going to come in? Are we going to allow them to, just do full amnesty and just let them do the design guidelines? Are we going to, with potential fee deferrals or programs for compliance, or, within 6 months after the approval of the ordinance, that kind of stuff. How do you want to transition? I mean, you right now, I mean, you could give them 90 days right now. I mean, Alex, if I'm wrong, I mean, the emergency order is now been lifted. So, I mean, I could set the date based on my ability to do it through the emergency ordinance, and then but I don't want to do that. I don't want to work these guys in.
Yes, I think the commission should provide some direction on how they think a transition should happen and whether people should, be allowed to maintain it or whether they have to meet the new standards or that. The ordinance is what the ordinance is and establishes a deadline. So we may have to go back to the council, prior to these guidelines being adopted.
Okay. Commissioner Benzo.
Yeah, I mean, I think they should have like up to a year to figure it out. It seems like it could take that long to work through all the issues. I mean, we encourage them to do quicker, but they should be given 9 months to a year to transition to some sort of permanent solution. Not in favor of the full amnesty program, but I am in favor of, these are 3 businesses who've stuck it out, made it work. So maybe there's a way to do a fee deferral program or something to keep those 3 businesses, those spaces active while they transition to a permanent solution that meets our new standards.
Okay, so what you're saying is give them a significant amount of time, 9 to 12 months, to transition to the new standard. No amnesty. You have to
transition over. Maybe there's some fee deferral, but you have to transition over.
got it. Okay.
So I guess my first question would be to Mayor Tana. In other cities, and I don't know, maybe not that many cities have done this yet, but in other cities that have shifted out of the state of emergency and shifted over from a temporary sort of model to a more permanent model, what timeline has usually been used to allow for transitioning, and how effective has that timeline been? If you can answer that, I recognize that's somewhat broad.
Yeah, no, I can't answer the transitioning from. There are some communities that have just said after they've lifted their order, you have 90 days to remove your temporary use. And then, then they would have, if they were wanting to come back, they would have to go through, right now, they would have to go through our outdoor dining program as associated with section 17.68 of our code. And then as our new design guidelines have brought in, when those are established, then they would have to follow those guidelines. So depending on that. So some communities have allowed, I don't know which ones, but I've been kind of reading up on it. Some of them have been letting them, anywhere between 90 to 120 days, but then they've exhausted their temporary use.
So 90 to 120 days from when the ordinance,
From the emergency ordinance.
from
when-
the lifting.
Yeah, the
of-
lifting of the emergency ordinance.
Okay, but we're not going to have this in place for how long?
Correct. That's why we're gonna, if you'd like those businesses to continue in their current form, in the interim, we need to have the city council adopt something before those regulations are adopted, because like you say, it's likely to take longer than a 90-day period.
Right.
Okay.
From my point of view, I think that it's reasonable to give the currently existing uses more time to adapt, especially because we're not done on our end figuring out, everything that we want to do. So just doing a 90-day cutoff from the end of the emergency, when we may not even have an ordinance in place for them to replace things with at that point in time, seems unreasonable. I'm not sure how long it would actually take to build out permanent construction. And part of that, of course, is going to depend on what guidelines we ultimately end up adopting and so on and so forth. But I guess the way that I see it, I think it would be beneficial to allow for the current temporary uses to continue for some period of time after we've adopted the new ordinance, not just after the end of the emergency. And of course, that's going to require council action to allow one way or the other. How long, I'm not exactly sure. I don't think there should be a universal amnesty, but the existing temporary structures can just continue on indefinitely. I do think that we're going to want to eventually shift over from the temporary structure to whatever permanent guidelines we end up coming up with, so that we have, higher quality stuff that meets our various requirements, and that's a better reflection on Pinole. But the exact timeline for that, I'm just not sure about. I'd say probably somewhere between 6 months and a year for the passing of the ordinance, but I don't know whether that's a realistic time frame for construction and so on and so forth.
Commissioner Martinez?
Thank you. Full amnesty, I'm not sure that I'm willing to put that out there on the table. However, as noted by everybody, we're not done with this yet. So my first question would go to Mr. Hanham. If we were to say, okay, once we've completed our work with this and city council's completed their work, would 6 months be a reasonable number to get them into compliance with the new guidelines? Would that seem reasonable by other city standards? Can you answer that question first?
I think if we work with the existing businesses to see where they're at in terms of their design components, we might be able to, that's a pretty hard question.
And if you don't have the answer, that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would
ask
just,
the question, right?
we've let the businesses know that we are going through the process of adopting a new program, a new permanent program. And so.
So they're aware we're working on
Yeah,
this.
we're working on it. Now it's just a matter of how long we allow for the temporary uses to remain at this point.
Okay. So then that brings up the second part, and this is my question goes to Attorney Mogg. Can you please help guide us through? We're dealing with issues, obviously, of liability, the city's liability. And I think we talked earlier about the business owners need to have, I was saying 1 million, and I think you shared with us that it's actually a $2 million threshold. I want to make sure that if there's any liability, the example being there's an accident and it sues, that we, the city, are not on the hook for that because we didn't bring sues up into compliance with the proper brake stops, the proper shielding on the sides, all of those things that we're now working through. Alex, how do we protect the city? What's the best way to do that?
There would not be issues of significant liability in that situation for the city. Whenever an accident happens, the city often gets named because the city has deeper pockets than an individual business. So, someone might still file a claim against the city or do that, but we would have, a number of immunities and defenses available. So I don't have concern about significant liability, and they would have insurance as well that would protect the city. Any of these businesses in the right of way have been required to have insurance.
Right. It just, I can't remember the details of it, folks, but I just remember that somehow when we were under the executive order, there was this kind of blanket, I don't want to say non-liability for the cities, but once the emergency order was done, that kind of, if I remember right, it was supposed to roll some of that responsibility back onto us and the business owners. And I'm saying us as the city of Pinole. So I just want to make sure that we're crossing the T's and dotting the I's, that if we're going to allow these businesses to continue on business as usual, that we're not on the hook if something happens over at Sue's or anywhere else for that matter.
No, we would not be on the hook.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the guidance. So I guess to sum up my point is that I'm okay with allowing the businesses to continue business as usual, but we should probably start working on an action plan to that they know once this is completed in X number of months, we're going to expect them to be in compliance or remove these structures. So that would be whatever that looks like, whether it's 6 months, whether it's 9 months, a year, I'm agreeable to the group. So that's kind of where I'm landing with this. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioner Curran?
Yes, you know, I think that there's going to be a natural endpoint once we start getting into winter and rainy weather, that these outside units are not going to be really some place that somebody wants to go to eat. So I think there's a natural time limit, which is like, you know, like I said, October 1st or November 1st. But after that, hopefully we get a lot of rain in next year that people aren't going to want to eat out there. And the other thing, if we look at these three remaining places that have outdoor seating, I'm not really sure what Tina's situation is going to be, because it's kind of like they incorporated that walkway between, you know, the Pear Street Bistro and the Bank of Pinole. It's kind of like incorporated into their business anyway. So I'm not sure if they would really still be quote outdoor seating that would require a permit or not. You know, I don't know. I don't think Tina is going to want to continue because they have, you know, 2 rooms of you know, seating inside. And I think that's where people usually want to sit. I think that when they're outdoor seating, they had the outdoor seating in the back. It's really not a very nice place to be, you know, where you just want to sit there, and it's not like Paris where you're just looking out with coffee, you know, looking at a parking lot, you know. So I think that Sue's place is the only one who's going to want to have continue their parklet, and they're doing it. I think they'd be doing it more to expand their business than they would to provide an enjoyable experience. So I think we're probably just looking at Sue's place as you know, as an issue. So I like I say, I think we should just, you know, say October 1st and November 1st, and you have to do it by then because there's a natural break.
All right, so basically to me, it just depends upon when we have the actual regulation in place. So, I mean, if we don't have the regulation in place until October 1, then they can't transition to it October 1. So, I mean, having a hard and fast date deadline doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But I think one thing that I am hearing consensus on, I believe, is that no amnesty, that when the time comes and this regulation is in place, that we expect conformance to that, and no tents, no temporary, whatever. Okay, is that fair enough? Can I say that?
Yep.
Okay. So that's definitely one thing. Then the other issue is do we want, so there are 2 more issues. One, do we want to allow them to continue business as usual until the target you must change over date? That,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah,
I mean, Dave's probably got a good point. At some point, they may just stop doing it anyways,
right.
but we should allow them to, those businesses to continue. They've been doing it for 3 years at this
3
point.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
is that my opinion?
Okay,
I would agree.
okay,
I'd also agree. I think the whole point of having a grace period as well, we're allowing things to continue as they were.
Okay, so they
Okay.
can continue. That's what we suggest, that they can continue until the new regulation is in place. And then, do we want to say you've got 3 to 6 months after that regular, I mean, because hopefully they'll be part of that movement if they want to or not. And if we're only dealing with Sue's place, then they'll be part of the public comment, they'll be part of, everything, and having 3 to 6 months to make that change seems like a reasonable thing. I mean,
It seems quick. Because they gotta design it, they gotta presumably save up to pay for it.
but wouldn't they be doing that? No?
Well, I think.
No.
We'll have to work with Alex on getting something to them, to the council, to allow them to extend. And then and then inform the businesses, you have until such a date, or such a date, and then within this amount of time, you need to be in compliance with the new ordinance.
So at
So that puts them on warning that it's coming. So you need to either start preparing for it, or you need to shut it down and do so, and then you just have to wait until.
So this is where Commissioner Curran's October 1st deadline comes in, right? So, I mean, if we were to give a specific date, maybe it's actually November, because that's when the rains come.
No, but like, for example, like if we put the ordinance together and we say to the businesses, we're working on this temporary business, or a permanent ordinance for outdoor dining. And we'll probably have this in about a year. From the time of the adoption of the ordinance, you have 3 to 6 months to comply. If you don't, then you're no longer allowed to do outdoor dining.
Right.
You
And
lose your.
that's-
you
So,
lose
so
your
it's not a fixed date, it's a
No.
time, right?
It's a
And that's
Yeah.
what I was
That's
saying.
what- yeah,
So,
that's what-
but you're thinking 3 to 6 months is too short. It's
Yeah.
one business and they know what's going
But
on.
if we can't tell them what we're gonna be doing or what the requirements are, 'cause it could take 6 months to a year to get to a point where these are the new rules. Then how do they know what to start aiming? If they have to do something.
Okay. Commissioner Menace.
And also, I think it's a matter open to question whether all the businesses are necessarily aware of what's going on. I mean, did the city reach out and contact each affected business before tonight?
All the businesses are that are operating right now. All the businesses that are no longer operating, they no longer have a temporary use permit.
No,
The
no.
only three, yes, the 3 businesses know that we are moving forward, and Tina knows, 'cause I talked to Tina personally, and the people at Sue's, we told them that we're gonna be starting this process, and that we're gonna be looking to do a more permanent basis. Pear Street isn't really that worried about it, to be honest. They just want to know what the permanent process is. And can they do it? Can they continue to do it? That's what they're meaning.
Right.
Okay.
Because technically they are required to do an outdoor dining permit. They are on a temporary use permit.
So what, I think again, so we've said no amnesty. We've also, I think, sounds like we have the idea that until this is in place, that they're status quo. And so they have to go with the temporary use permit, et cetera, is what we are recommending. And the question is then how long do we want to give them after the new ordinance or regulations is accepted to make the transition, if they're going to transition? I said 3 to 6 months. Commissioner Benzuli thinks that's too short. I don't really care, but I mean, we can make that transition as much as possible. Do we want to say 6 to 9 months? Is that reasonable?
I mean, I'm not a builder, so I don't know the typical timelines for new outdoor construction, permitting, so on and so forth. But I do think that 3 to 6 months may be excessively narrow, and I think that 6 to 9 months may be more plausible, but I'll freely admit this is outside of my personal knowledge and expertise, and I would defer to other members of the commission who have more specific knowledge and the city staff with more specific knowledge on that point.
Well, and we're making them come to the planning commission to get approval. Prior to them doing anything,
Yep, for a parklet,
which takes time.
not for the others.
Yeah.
Commissioner Current and Commissioner Martinez, do you guys have an opinion?
No, I think I've expressed my opinion, that they'll probably reopen with the permanent thing probably in March or April of next year. No matter what we decide.
Okay, so let's just say 6 months to a year, choose a number in there. You know, yeah,
That's fine. I mean, because once we can, until we're going to be putting a policy in place. So this is your recommendation to the council at this point.
okay. Well, fellow commissioners, planning manager, have we done that?
Yes, I think, yeah, we think we've got a good idea of what we need to do. So we've gotten good recommendations, and so we'll move forward.
Before we move forward, though,
So close yet so far.
there's also the oh so minor matter of public comment, which I do not believe we have yet done.
Actually, thank you. Yeah, we do need to do that. Thanks for the reminder. Do we have any public comment?
I don't have any at this point. Dave, do you have any public comment back there?
No. No one's online.
Okay, good. Okay.
That's moot. Okay. Then let's go ahead and thank you very much, gentlemen, for a good discussion. I think we were, even though it took a long time, I think we're actually pretty okay. Let's move on to H, city planners and commissioners reports.
I don't have a lot to report on, but we'll just move forward. Pinole Shores 2. I think we're finalizing the admin draft of environmental. And so we're looking to schedule this for March 13th planning commission meeting. Right now we've got to cut one last item to take care of. And so we'll be working with the applicant on that. You will be having a couple of small conditional use permits come before you. One is for a massage therapy establishment on San Pablo. You'll have another item regarding a paint booth on 730 San Pablo. An installation which was part of the Cortez, bringing back, amending that condition of approval, conditional use permit. So that'll be coming before you here within the next couple of meetings. As well as, I think those are the two projects. There could be a tentative map as well, probably the end of March. I got to get the notices out. It's just a small 2-parcel lot split. That could be coming before you, but I'm checking with our land surveyor to make sure if it's required to or not. So working on that, and then I think that's it. And then we'll be moving this forward to the council. So here in the next few months. So
Great. Do any commissioners have any reports or questions? No.
Yeah, I have a
Yeah, let's go there first, then we'll come back to there. Sure. Commissioner Current?
Yeah, I have two things I'd like clarified from the staff is that we recently received a notice about the Bank of America office scheduled to close in July in the Appanady Shopping Center. Do you know whether that's related to closing down because of the Safeway expansion, or is that going to be a permanent thing?
that I don't know. I'll have to take a look. I'll have to check with the new property owners, because there's a new property owners for the Pinole Square area. So
Yeah.
I will check that out.
And something, David, that I talked to you before is that unfortunately we saw that we're being sued because we're not providing enough affordable housing. Can you comment on that, why we're being sued and what the status is with us with HCD, and whether there's really any basis to the lawsuit, since we are building over 600, we're in the process of building over 600 units, either that are in construction or in the permit process. I'm not sure what the basis of the lawsuit is, and I'd kind of like to have Alex's take on the merits of the lawsuit.
Yeah, good evening, commissioners again. So I'm not gonna go into detail about the lawsuit, but we received the lawsuit related to the adoption of the housing element. And essentially alleging that we adopted it prematurely and that it's not in compliant with the state laws. The city's in the process of getting comments from HCD, and I would expect that a revised housing element would come to the planning commission for adoption at its next meeting for readoption, and then to the city council shortly thereafter, which was the plan that was explained to the city council in their meeting when they adopted it. I can't remember if that was something we talked about at the planning commission, but I've certainly talked about with the city council that we anticipated coming back once we got HCD's comments to readopt it. So we'll be responding to the lawsuit, and depending on the comments from HCD, the lawsuit may or may not become moot.
Okay. Yeah, it amazes me that Pinole was picked, and then you got like Lafayette, Marinda, and Moraga, which are all kind of been hostile towards any kind of housing, and they're not in the lawsuit. There just seems to be, I don't know, arbitrariness as far as who they're suing. Okay, that's the only questions I had.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Martinez?
Thank you. The questions that I have would be, Dave, for our parcel on San Pablo Avenue between the bank and the community corner. I think it's Raquel. I met her years ago. There's been some activity and some building underground and piping and things of that nature. Is there anything, is that going to be some outdoor dining that's going to come back for us to review, or has that already been approved? And are we now on target for something to be delivered, whatever that something is? Can you shed a little bit of light at what's happening with that particular project, please?
Yeah, that project was approved back in, I think, 2020. It's as an outdoor dining space, as an outdoor space for special events and to be able to bring on, some food trucks and a lot of it was to work in concert with the farmers market at the time. However, I don't know where that stands, but she's a lot of the undergrounding and some of the irrigation because she's going to have some landscaped areas as part of her project. So a lot of that is going to be regarding that, and the fences and the signage and going up. That's all part of the program. The building that's being built, that was part of the plan. And that was submitted. So yeah, she's just building out the plan that was approved in I want to say it was in.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was like, I want to say in the spring or summer of 2020.
Okay.
So,
Well, thank you. I
Mhm.
just we just had those questions. I appreciate the guidance.
no problem.
Commissioner Menace?
So there's two things. I think one of them is the communication, because it's communication from the member of the public asking a question more of staff broadly. So I'll save that for communications. The other one, I'm not quite sure whether it falls under planner's report or communication, so I'll bring it up now. I was basically invited to a forum that's going to be held with one of the entities that's suing the city of Pinole, where they're going to be discussing sort of their side of things in March. And I was told it would also be okay to, invite people from the city, like if they had them, or I don't know whether they were intended to invite the city's attorneys or not, but I wanted to sort of get feedback on, would it be okay to go in my personal role and my role as a planning commissioner? Would it be okay for city staff to go? So, yeah, that's sort of my inquiries on that front.
You are certainly welcome to attend any event in your personal capacity, not representing that you're representing the city in any way, but you're certainly welcome to go in any in your personal capacity. You have to send me the invitation so we can see what it is. Those types of groups I met, have events all the time, city staff generally don't go to any of those. And I can't imagine would be going to this, but if you forward it, share with the city manager.
Okay, just wasn't quite sure what the whole policy was there. I figured this would be the appropriate part of the meeting to bring it up.
Yeah, you can certainly attend any meeting in your individual capacity. You just shouldn't represent that you're there on behalf of the planning commission or, the city.
Right, obviously.
All right, then I just wanted an update, please, on the Adobe Road Trail breaches that was brought up at our last meeting.
Yeah, Public Works is working on those right now. We also are, I talked to Sanjay today. And as part of the Pinole Vista project, there's a condition on there regarding the dirt that as they're digging up and they go through that we get first priority for the dirt. So we'll be taking a look at that, and if we can get all that, then we'll be moving that towards that area and redoing that area. I haven't, he didn't say really anything whether it's in a capital improvement project or anything of that nature, but I know that they're putting together plans to be able to fix it. So,
Excellent, great.
and
Thank you very much.
they do have access to the dirt if the dirt's clean from the Pinole Vista project.
Excellent,
Mhm.
okay. Is there an update then on the objective design standards?
Yes, we're putting a schedule together right now. We're going to go over that. Justin and I worked on it. We're going to send it to Lily to make sure it meets everything we need to do. And then at that point, we'll be bringing it to the commission to review. So we're working on it.
Excellent, okay,
Mhm.
great. So we're looking at a month.
Yeah, I would hopefully we'd be able to bring that to you because it'll be more of an informational item. So it'll probably be the means are the same day as the 13th, 27th. It would probably be closer to the 27th, most likely
March,
March,
okay.
if not sooner.
And then we had asked about an update on the park and tree master plans.
Yeah, that's still getting off the ground. I think I have messages into the Parks Department. The last I've heard is they were looking at different consultants to do it. And I don't know
Well,
if
they've
they are.
already hired a consultant.
Well, then if they've done that, then that's the last contact I've had. I tried to reach out to Maria in Community Services because it's being run out of the Community Services Department. So if they have the RFP, then I'm assuming that they've probably started the work, but I'll have to find out. I wasn't able to get a hold of Maria this week,
All right,
last week.
okay. And a tree master plan that's still, I don't know why I brought that up before. I think because still concerned about 2518 San Pablo, which illegally took down a tree and then has never replaced it. Have they ever had to pay for that?
Yes, I mean, they ended up, after talking with Joe Bingaman, it's my understanding that, yes, they are paying for the removal of that tree. However, we are putting it in because of the watering and what needs to happen with that tree in the beginning that we will be, I think we'll be planting that tree.
Okay, we'll be planting that tree, but they did have to pay.
For taking it down, for removing it.
Okay. And then if you could just address just for our commissioners, the attendance in person and the quorum for physical presence that's going to be.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that forward at your next meeting. But basically we'll be adopting the city council, what the city council adopted at their, I think it was their January. In January.
So the way we participate remotely now under AB 361 will go away when the governor's emergency declaration ends on February 28th. And so people, commissioners will have to participate in person. There are the traditional Brown Act option for participating remotely if you're put your address on the agenda and make that location open to the public. And there's also the possibility of participating remotely occasionally for if you have just cause or emergency circumstances, which are defined in the law. So basically, like you're sick or you're taking care of a sick family member, but even those have limits on how many times you can do that during a year.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
And I'll be getting that out to you guys this week, so. I was gonna follow with Alex to see what it was the council adopted and get that out to you guys. So you have it.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And I think just the last thing is, if you could help us out when you have slides that the font is a little bit bigger, some of when you have, especially if it's not in the
Right.
in the memorandum.
Right.
I couldn't read it.
Okay, no
So,
problem. We can do that.
yeah. So even if we have to do more slides, that's okay.
No problem. We can do
Yeah.
that.
I'd appreciate that.
No problem.
Okay. Any other? We'll move on to communications then.
Yes, so I have a communication I received just a few hours ago from a member of the public stating there's washout damage along the bay off of Tennant Avenue, the walking area between Tennant and Pinole Shores. They were wondering whether there were any plans being made to repair the blocked walking path between those 2 points.
I'll have to check that. I'll have to ask Joe. I don't know anything about that. So
I actually think that's East Bay Regional Park, isn't it?
the trail is,
If it's the Bay Trail, that's East Bay Regional Park District.
Okay, just figured this would be sort of the appropriate point in the meeting, to bring up the communication.
yeah, no, I'll check with Joe, but that's probably what he'll tell me. So I'll email you the answer for that.
Thanks. Any other communications from anyone? Hey, Ben. I think that was an old one. That's an old hand you have up, right, Commissioner Current? Yes, put it down. So our next meeting is February 27th at 7 PM scheduled. This meeting is adjourned.